hereby open the City Council discussion-only meeting for Tuesday, February 18th. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Babcock?
Present.
Councilmember Gregg?
Here.
Councilmember Meadows?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Stevens?
Here.
Mayor Byer?
Here. First order of business is to approve the agenda.
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in, anybody want to amend or change the agenda?
Nope.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The agenda is adopted. The next item is communication with the audience. This is the time that people are allowed to speak to council for whatever they would like to speak on. I have a blue card from MSU Federal Credit Union, and they would like to speak when we get to their item, which is fine. And if anybody would rather speak during their agenda item, that's fine as well. But I also have a card here from Alice Drager.
I have a handout, if that's all right. My goal is to stay short with these handouts. I never thought I'd support limits on comments until last week.
Okay, you are now limited to 1 minute and 20 seconds.
They go really fast.
Go, Alice, go.
So on the draft contract with MSU FCU, which was so beautifully written, I must say, congratulations to the people who wrote that contract. It's gorgeous. I just see one problem with it. As it is currently written, the contract seems to fail at what is promised to the voters in the ballot proposal. So in the contract as it currently exists, and I realize you're probably going to change it, the purchaser can actually close 60 days from the March 10th vote if the voters okay it, without the site plan or the SUP approvals in place. So the credit union could then do something else like hold on to it or sell the property. I think they're perfectly good actors. We all think they're perfectly good actors. It's just the contract's a little weird. So Section 12 says the sale must close within 60 days of the approval of the March 10th vote. There's no mechanism in the contract right now for extension, and there's no required extension if the approvals are not done. Section 23A gives the purchaser the right to obtain all the government approvals before closing, so they can back out if they don't have the approvals. But the contract doesn't actually require the approvals prior to closing. So the credit union can buy it without the approvals in place. And there's nothing about a deed restriction or anything else requiring the office building. So there's nothing to guarantee in this contract what happens if the closing happens before the approvals. So whatever is built there would still have to require council approval. It's not like they can build anything they want, but there's no way that this will get all the approvals necessary in 60 days, let's be honest. And there's no guarantee to the voters in this contract commensurate with the ballot proposal. So this rather elegant contract needs some revision. You can always revise and extend it later, but it would be good to get it right now so we don't go through a Royal Oaxacas scene, which we won't because this contract is gorgeous, I have to say. On University Place, I think we need a lot more material in front of you and in front of the public before you make a decision. I'd like to see the third-party appraisal. I FOIA'd that, but I hope we can see it sooner. Many people who are talking to me voluntarily are expressing skepticism of the low valuation from Columbia Sussex. What do we know about the parking revenue, gross and net? What are the parking discounts being given to the hotel and the office users now so we can figure out what the parking is really worth? What is the original and the current condo docs in terms of what do they say? And why shouldn't we consider putting this out for open sale rather than selling it to Columbia Sussex specifically? I don't think we owe them an exclusive deal, so why don't we see who wants to buy the land? Doesn't have to be Columbia Sussex by any means. Somebody else might pay more. On your TIF policy, I think it's important to keep in mind that our government and LEAP is incentivized to push TIF. First, the city gets a hefty application fee for TIF, 1% or up to $25,000 for every application, plus a yearly administrative fee that I think is $15,000, which we make money on. The city gets developers to pay for public infrastructure at a relatively low interest rate, generally considered lousy by developers. They hate your interest rate, which makes me like it. Every project that uses TIF is counted as a TIF success story, so I've heard LEAP and MEDC brag about Center City as being it's a $132 million brownfield success story, even though the environmental cleanup on there was really minimal. We spent more from taxes on Mr. Bell's father, attorney and financial advisor, than we actually did on environmental cleanup. As you know, most of the money went to a parking garage. So what TIF does, and Jessie Gregg made this point in her campaign, what TIF does is subvert the will of voters who voted for taxes that are instead being used for whatever's covered in a TIF. It turns county-wide buses into East Lansing's new sewers. It turns classrooms at Lansing Community College into East Lansing's new parking garages. And in this way, it contributes to wealth disparities, right? So basically, we take money that would otherwise be going county-wide, often to people who are on the lower end of the income spectrum. Ingham County Health, which covers people who are underinsured. Lansing Community College, where a lot of people go because they can afford it more or because they've been in school systems that are underfunded, so they end up at LCC. buses, which often support people who don't have cars. We take money from all of that and we build new shiny things for East Lansing. And as we do that, I think it contributes to wealth disparities, so we should be thinking about that. Thanks.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak at this time?
Can I respond to one thing?
Oh, hang on one second.
Good. I just want to have you look at 10E and F, which limit the activity on this property to that approved by the voters on March 10th, and limits their ability as to what could be done with the property. So, okay. It's not a deed restriction, but it is a restriction in the purchase agreement, so it probably will end up in the deed. So. Go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry, sir, you were coming to the podium. Come.
Good evening. My name is Brian Jackson. I'm with the Ingham County Public Defender's Office. I'm assigned to this district court. I'm here to speak on agenda item 6.4, plea bargain policies. Basically here to speak in support of some changes, specifically to the fines and costs as it relates to driving related offenses. Currently, the City of East Lansing has a plea bargain policy that's all written out that you've become aware of. I was here last meeting and it was shown or used. And long story short is that people have to pay the maximum fines and costs, which is $500 under the statute, for any driving while license suspended, even if they clear their license of tickets, however much that costs, even if they have a valid license and they cleared it all, they still have to pay $500 just to get a plea offer or reduction outside of driving while license suspended. And just to supplement information from last time when I was here, I looked at the other district courts in the county, and I have their fee schedules that I shared with at least a few of you. 54A District Court in Lansing. I have all of their things here, but no ops, no license on person is $200. And that is basically what you can buy in East Lansing for $500 if you clear your license and get it reduced. The only problem is that a lot of people who fix their license and come in here, they don't have $500 to put on that. Also on this same sheet from 54A District Court, violation of a temporary instruction permit. It's like your learner's permit. A violation of that is $205. Here, if you're a person who violates your permit and maybe has passengers in the car that's not related to you, and you get stopped and it finds out you have your permit, and then even if you get your license from there, you would have to pay $500. And there's other fines on here. In 55th District Court, that's in Mason, similar thing. They have a full printout of all of the driving and other offenses. And looking at the same one, no ops is what it's called. There, that's $180. But right under it, on their document, is waive fines and costs with proof. So even in that court, it's their policy to waive the fines and costs if you end up getting your license. And same with 54A District Court. I see here there's an asterisk, and under the asterisk it reads, fines for fail to display a valid license, no ops, and proof of registration may be waived if valid proof is shown at the time of the violation. So it's just other districts and jurisdictions do it a lot differently, and I think that should be considered. Also, I would like to bring your attention to a January 2020 Joint Task Force, Michigan Joint Task Force on Jail and Pretrial Incarceration. And what that is a bipartisan task force that was designed to take a look at our Michigan's growing jail populations and see what, if anything, can be done. And again, this was Democrats, Republicans, Governor Whitmer, and everybody else came together on this, one of the few things that everybody's came together on. And some of the findings from there is that traffic cases make up half of district court cases, and is the third most common reason why people in Michigan are in jail or go to jail. And their recommendations, the number one recommendation in this was to, and this is again for the legislator, but it could be applied right here if you change policies, would be to stop suspending and revoking licenses for offenses unrelated to safe driving, and reclassify most traffic offenses as civil infractions and not criminal misdemeanors. So even though it's kind of partially for the legislature, because the legislature could change driving while license suspended and no license on person down to a civil infraction, that's for them, but the prosecutor and any prosecutor could have plea bargain policies which would treat some of these driving while license suspended and no ops as civil infractions, or reduce it to them without charging $500 like the other jurisdictions do. Also, so that kind of, I know there was some conversation that these are serious offenses or were treated as serious offenses, but really the trend now in Michigan and other places are to treat them not as serious offenses, but to recognize that it's such a burden on people whose only mistake was basically driving without a valid license. Sometimes they know, sometimes they don't know. Sometimes they're able to fix it as soon as they find out or the next day. Sometimes they find out and they aren't able to fix it because you have to choose. Like I had a gentleman last week, who had to choose between he's basically behind on his rent or try to come up with his $500. I think it obviously disproportionately affects poorer people, because if you think what $500 is to a person whose maybe rent is around $500, is a lot, because other people's mortgages or rent, I mean, that's basically a whole check going towards that.
Yes, question.
Are you finished?
I had a little more, but it's okay.
I just wanted you to ask you if you had reviewed Mr. Yates' suggested changes to the plea bargain policy that we're going to be taking a look at tonight.
I haven't reviewed it.
You have or have not? Okay. I think they do reflect some of the comments that you have made. So you might want to, I think he's in the audience someplace, you might want to check those out. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And on that same thing, so basically now we need City Council to act, because in some recent plea negotiations, it's basically like I tell people circumstances, they're very dire, and in fact I have someone here that could speak to her circumstances, but I tell them the circumstances, and now it's basically, we have a client, that client is City Council, they have policies that's been put in place since '08, and I can't do anything about it. So, other jurisdictions, not only do they have their own policy within the prosecutor's body, but I don't think it comes from City Council. So now it's basically on City Council to try to work this out, which you are doing. As far as the severity of driving while license suspended or not, so in East Lansing, a part of these same policies, a person can get in a fight, just an open fight with somebody else, a mutual fight, fighting in public. You can give a false name to a police officer. You can walk around with an open container. You can hinder and oppose police officers during arrest. And a lot of times, a person will be offered a reduction to a civil infraction at $390, which is less than a person who may have to drive their child to a doctor's appointment. So I think right there, just looking at the differences is something to note. Basically, and I hope the changes reflect a lower amount of money, and also treating some driving while license suspended as civil infractions without having to pay that price. Because all the clients that I represent, these people are all determined by the court to be indigent. They are deemed not having sufficient enough money to hire their own attorney. The people that come in with their own attorneys, they would love to have these policies, and for good reason, because you can pay $500. It might not be a big deal to them when their attorney costs thousands of dollars. And then ultimately it's going to be treated as a civil infraction. I think that City Council should consider, removing the mandatory amount to it and just have the court or, I guess, City Council set a lower amount that doesn't automatically have to be at the top $500 because people cannot afford it. And I can send anybody or just leave these copies here, but it literally has most or all of the driving offenses for Lansing and for Ingham County and Mason, and all of them are significantly lower than $500.
So I think that council is very sympathetic to this argument from everything that I've heard. So if you're going to stick around for 6.4 on the agenda, if we have any questions, we might ask you up again.
Yeah, I would love to, but you hear those noises out there.
Oh,
Those
is
are-
that? They can
those are
come
my
in.
kids. Yeah, so we'll see how long I can hang out,
Okay.
but so far so good.
Two questions. The disorderly conduct and the other charges that you mentioned, those are charged under city law and not by the Ingham County prosecutor, correct?
Correct, and there are state laws that
Right.
correspond, but it is the East Lansing ordinances that
Right.
they're under.
So it is an apples-to-apples comparison. We're not talking two different prosecuting units. Second, in your experience, when you're in district court, how much negotiating power does the prosecuting attorney you're dealing with have? I know when I was in the courts, some prosecutors had a lot more room to negotiate than others. If you were to ask the prosecuting attorney representing the city on city violations to dismiss the $500, how much leeway do they have to do that in your experience?
In my experience here, I can't really tell. A lot of times I can get the price down from 500 to 400, showing like great need and everything.
Okay.
And there has been a few times where some other resolution was worked out, but recently I basically was blocked from that type of plea offer because the client, East Lansing City Council, has its policies in place that would prevent a reduction from 500 or 400 or anything like that. And a lot of these people are having a hard time paying this amount. Some people pay it, but I'm noticing the longer I'm here, there's more cases that I had at one point that they had, okay, we will reduce it from driving license suspended to no license on person, or to the defective equipment, which is a good resolution, but they can't pay the $500. So then an arrest warrant is reissued to them, and basically they get picked up, or they're one of the people whose address is good and they find it in the mail and they come back in and start the whole process over. And even then, some people may have paid $100, some people weren't able to pay any money, and then it's like, all right, you have, according to the prosecutor's current dealings, it's usually like, can you pay it all within either today or 14 days? And a lot of times people are like, well, I can try, and who knows what happens, or I know I can't do that, and then they usually have to just plead guilty to something. So again, I just hope that this body can empower its city attorney to either automatically reduce it or at least have the power to, especially considering that most of the people that have these charges are indigent, and if they had the money, they would have paid their speeding ticket 2 months ago, for example. But a lot of people don't.
Okay. So when they pay that $100, say they're given the $500, they go down to the counter that day, they pay $100. If they don't complete the $500 payment, what happens then to the $100 they've paid? Does the prosecutor count that toward them, or do they kind of say, well, you missed it?
My understanding is it counts towards pay the balance in full by a certain date, often 2 weeks. I think the policy might read that it's all gone, but I think in practice that money does get counted.
Okay.
So,
But-
but it still doesn't mean people are able to do it.
Oh,
It
sure.
just It just means that they didn't waste their $100, so to speak, because it'll be at least, because there's going to be fines somewhere.
Okay. But the prosecuting attorneys you're dealing with are saying that their negotiation power is limited because of the policy set by this council, correct?
I heard that one time for certain.
Thank you.
Councilmember, or Mayor Pro Tem?
So we will be talking about this later on in the agenda, and I appreciate you coming and talking about it. So the memo that Councilmember Meadows referenced has kind of three brackets to it, and it's the current city plea deal, proposed city, the changed one based on the last conversation, and it also has a comparison to the Ingham County Prosecutor's Office. So kind of what you were referencing before, and I believe what you had sent along to myself and maybe other council members. But I know that you did have somebody here, and I wanted to give an opportunity, if you're not going to be around for the conversation, to have that person tell their story to council.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michelle. I got a ticket for driving on an expired permit. I don't have access to a car, and I tucked it in my wallet, did not realize it was expired. Anyways, I know I broke the law. I'm expecting to pay a fine. I cannot afford a $500 fine. I have a special needs 5-year-old. $500, that's my rent. Like he was saying, that's my rent. Like I fully anticipate like a consequence. I broke the law. I'm not asking to get off scot-free, but there's got to be some kind of a leeway. $500 is just a lot of money to a lot of people. I don't really know what else he wants me to say, but I mean,
I think that's the point.
No, that's...
Thank you. Can you fill that out later
Yeah,
on? Yeah, thank
later
you.
on.
Or you can just take it with you, that's what I mean. Yeah, you don't have to stand up there. Okay. Would anybody else like to speak to council before we start? Okay, great. We will close that section. The next section is communication from council members. Councilmember Babcock.
Unusually, nothing.
Okay.
But thank you.
Councilmember Gregg?
Yeah, nothing.
Okay. We're going to keep it rolling,
Two
Councilmember
things.
Meadows?
One, I want to bring to people's attention I think it's like the 30th, maybe it's the 50th, Capital Area Community Service Walk for Warmth. It's this Saturday, 9 a.m. Neighborhood Empowerment Center is where it starts. It's a 3-mile walk. All the money that is raised through that walk goes to provide heating services and help to people in need within the community. Our own Heather Pope has been like on the board of directors there for 20 years or something. Yeah, but it's a great event. It's easy to do. You can stop, downtown at the peanut shop and buy some peanuts on your way back to the Neighborhood Empowerment Center, or stop and get lunch or whatever. But it's if you have a chance to do it, it's a donation type of event, and it's a great event. So please participate. The second thing I've got is really to council itself, which is we talked last fall about beginning to have the conversation about the social equity aspect of marijuana provisioning, which allows small entrepreneurs and others to participate in the program. We currently do not permit that within our ordinance, and we did talk about getting that discussion started, and I'd like to just bring it up so that we can get it on the agenda. I did ask that ordinances from other communities that have already addressed this issue be provided. As soon as I get those, I'll pass them out. I'm seeing this as down the road a ways. We need to have I think another discussion-only meeting with regard to it once we get some information together, get a recommendation from the city attorney and other staff. But I just want to get it on the agenda going forward at some point.
Mayor Pro Tem?
I just have one thing. In the interest of consistency, and I'm taking a page out of Councilmember Gregg's book, I am going to be starting my coffee hours up again I fell off a little bit on them, and that is completely my bad. I did it more on when we had specific issues that we were talking about that I wanted to receive feedback from, but I'm going to start doing those regularly on the third Sunday of the month. And I'll be hosting them for right now at the Big B Coffee on Lake Lansing and Abbott. Owner Foster Coffee and I are in a conversation about possibly reserving a table over there and trying to move it around East Lansing to make sure that I'm kind of in every area. But for right now, so the next third Sunday, my bad, from 2 to 4 would be this coming Sunday. And that's at the Big B Coffee at 3499 East Lake Lansing Road. I'll be there from 2 to 4, again, every third Sunday of the month, 2 to 4, and I will be there to listen to any concerns or any issues. So please feel free to come out. Thank you.
Okay, and I have one thing. Last week, actually, a week from last Saturday, or the most recent Saturday, there was an incident at the 7-Eleven with the police and 3 people. And there was a social media post of a young man with an abrasion on his face and indicating that he believed that the police used excessive force. So while there hasn't been a complaint, we immediately looked at that. The police immediately looked at that and have been reviewing all of the documents and all of the tape video that's available for that case, and have been made it their first priority. So our plan is to be completely transparent on this issue. The police officers and the chief who I spoke to don't believe in hiding anything. They believe that they do. They follow procedure, and if an officer is found not to follow procedure, they don't want to hide that either. So when the investigation is over and the reports are finished, we will have a special public meeting to review all of the video and the reports and then release the video. I was asked to talk about this today because the discussion-only meetings have a wide viewership, and then more people would know about the special meeting. All right, the next item, communication from the city manager.
Just one item, just to echo the comments from Councilmember Meadows. Last year, a number of staff people and council members did the Walk for Warmth in Lansing, raised some money and awareness for people who were without heat or without the ability to pay their heating bills. Great cause. A lot of people came out for it. We'll be doing it again this weekend. I'll be joining with a number of staff members, Councilmember Meadows and others, so come out and do that Walk for Warmth. That's all I have.
It was a great event last
Thank
year.
you.
I'm sure it will this year.
Okay, our first discussion item, discussion of the Michigan State Federal Credit Union draft project proposal for City Parking Lot 14 and review of the draft purchase and sale agreement. So we'll have staff go through this, and then the MSU Federal Credit Union people can speak. You need to blow that up there.
No.
Did you bring your glasses?
I did.
There you go.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So, as you know, the council in December placed an item on the March 10th ballot for the voters to consider whether to allow the sale of Lot 4, which is the parking lot there at the corner of Albert and Abbott, to MSU FCU for the purposes of building a commercial office building. And within that ballot language, there was some flexibility given to MSU FCU as they were still sort of defining the concept that they were going to be working towards. And there was a request at that meeting that MSU FCU and staff provide an update at this meeting today, February 18th, as far as where we are with their concept, and as well where we've been able to get to in terms of a draft purchase and sale agreement. So today, I just ask, I know that MSU FCU, the team is here, so I have asked them to give you kind of a brief update. And they have some renderings they've provided as well. And then I will give you kind of an overview of the purchase and sale agreement, and we can take any of your questions that the council might have at that point.
Great.
So let me pull up the renderings. invite them.
All right, good evening. My name is Erin Bodell. I'm the Vice President of Facilities at MSU-FCU. On behalf of MSU-FCU, I'd like to thank the council this evening for giving us an opportunity to update you on this proposed project. We're very excited about having an opportunity to invest in growing our operations downtown East Lansing. Since our founding in 1937, MSU-FCU has grown to be nearly $4.7 billion in assets. We serve 286,000 members worldwide. We have 900 employees. We're ranked number 46th largest credit union in the nation. MSU-FCU continues to grow because we care about our members in the community and because we provide the products and services to help our members achieve their dreams. Our growth has allowed us to expand relationships and provide more support in the communities that we serve. The East Lansing community has been a great partner with the credit union throughout our 82 years in business, and we are interested in continuing that partnership by supporting economic development and job growth in the region. The credit union has been recognized as a great place to work. We pay competitive wages and offer robust benefits. Providing an opportunity for our employees to work downtown East Lansing with nearby coffee shops, restaurants, and MSU's campus will help us attract and retain great talent here in East Lansing. In addition to providing financial resources for our members, we support all the communities that we serve in a variety of ways, which includes philanthropic efforts in housing, youth programs, financial education, and the local arts. We're also working on several initiatives that we hope will add jobs and support economic development within the community. We operate and maintain our buildings and branches with the highest level of standard and care for employee and member safety, security, and comfort. Our buildings are well maintained and designed to be aesthetically integrated into the community. It is our intent to occupy, if approved, this building with credit union operations and potentially lease a portion of the building for others until we fully grow into the building. We intend to include space for our branch office, our intern center, which employs 30 employees, student employees, and a large mixed format community room. And then the remainder of the building would be used for our office operations, which will provide us room to grow over the next 5 years. So I'm going to invite Dave Mefford from Newman Smith up to talk about the concept that we have, and then we can answer any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. As Aaron said, my name is Dave Mefford. I'm a design architect with Newman Smith Architecture. I have been consulting on behalf of MSU-FCU on the Lot 4 site, really doing kind of conceptual studies for this office building that we'll be talking about here this evening. You can see on the screen, each floor plate is about 12,000 square feet. Conceptually, we're looking at about 8 stories, which is about 100,000 square feet overall in gross building area. The building is really situated around the 2 prime roads of Albert and Abbott. The branch entry that Aaron referenced would be accessed off the Hort corner. I don't know if I have access to so here. So the branch entry off the Hort corner at Abbott and Albert. The office entry would be further to the north off of Abbott. And then servicing would occur off of the public alley on the west side, and any tenant space accessible off the ground level would be off of Albert itself. Going back to these renderings, again, these are very conceptual, but we worked hard with MSU-FCU to kind of create a building that worked for their needs and kind of represented what they're about as a financial institution. We also went to great lengths to work, in conjunction with the city and really looking at what East Lansing is in the downtown core and create a building that we feel kind of matches and complements the great things that currently exist. From a materiality standpoint, we used a lot of brick. That's a very important element in the existing building stock here in the downtown area, and really kind of creating a design that complements the other surrounding buildings, certainly with the Park District to the south and the Center City development further to the east. In total, the building will not be more than 112 feet in height.
But we're looking, like I said, about 8 stories, a mix of brick, potentially some metal panel and glass. Also worked hard, given the urban context, to really kind of emphasize the ground plane, the fact that it's an urban location. There's a lot of people walking in the street, making sure that the exterior fronts of the building really had transparency, and there was an ability to kind of understand what the building was about and how it worked in the downtown core. Moving to the second rendering, this is along Albert, kind of looking back from the Park District up the new Evergreen connection. You can see, again, worked hard to really activate the facade, lots of transparency, and create an overall design aesthetic that worked and complemented a lot of the other buildings that are kind of in the area. In terms of, there's a minimal amount of facade lighting, again, really trying to create a building and a design that kind of worked both in the day and in the evening hours, and incorporating certain kind of scale elements like canopies here, which, help to bring the overall scale of the building down to more pedestrian level, given the fact that it is, an 8-story expression. If there's any questions relative to the design?
Is the first floor like 30% higher than the other floors? Is that?
Yeah, that's, the overall scale of the floors are in response to what's typically done in a commercial setting. The fact that there is a tenant space in terms of the branch on the hard corner of the building, and then possibly, again, another tenant space further to the west. From a commercial standpoint, you generally want that to be 16 to 18 feet in height, just so that you have the utmost flexibility.
Thanks.
Obviously, this is very much, conceptual, so that might move around a little, but.
Any questions for the architect?
Yeah, Aaron is just noting, just for the overall massing of the building, we worked hard, again, from a scale standpoint, and just to point out that the overall 2-story massing, there was a significant element in terms of trying to ground the building and bring the overall scale down relative to the uses within.
I think it does a great job. And the fact that it's not just a big block also helps. Mayor Pro Tem?
So, when do you think you'd have a site plan for this project finished and completed that we could be presented with to council, the public?
Yep.
To Planning Commission.
Planning Commission.
Planning Commission?
Well, we have, conceptual plans. Obviously, this is up for public vote next month. So in terms of the development conceptually, we've taken this to a point. Relative to bringing other consultants on board, engineering and, surveys, that kind of thing, it really kind of depends on the passage of the vote next month, just so that there's an actual project, but.
Okay. And, sorry, she's got a comment on that.
Just a couple things. Our intention is overall to move forward expeditiously if we are approved to do so. We have started and will continue to do some of our due diligence, and we hope to later in the summer move towards for site plan approval.
Okay.
Councilmember Babcock.
Yes, I realized I pulled one of your pens out of my bag. They're everywhere. I know your past buildings have had an environmental emphasis, and you've had gold LEED standard. Can you anticipate for us what the environmental, if there'll be any silver LEED, gold LEED, whether you'll meet any of those standards with this?
I think we can certainly say that we intend to follow LEED principles in our design. We have not necessarily formally determined that yet. In general, the building will have energy-efficient lighting. It will have a building management system designed to run efficiently from an HVAC standpoint. We tend to operate and attempt to do so with green standards. Okay. We have a Go Green committee that internally that helps promote and measure some of the things that we do from an operations standpoint.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Just speaking for myself, I couldn't be more happy. When I started on council, was it 24 years ago? No, 7 years ago, 6 years ago, I thought, why can't we get a nice office building downtown? And everybody that I talked to said, you can't have office until you have more density and more, cool things to do. And now we have it. And that the fact that it's MSU, SCU is just icing on the cake. So thank you very much. And we are not allowed to get involved in ballot questions about selling property. But I think there's a very good feel about this project. Mayor Pro Tem?
I'd like to say that sentiment again. I think that this is really good, and honestly, the reason why I asked about the site plan is just, with something on the ballot, I want to make sure that everybody in the public knows kind of what they're voting on, and I think everybody does have a fairly clear picture of that, but, any information that can be provided to the public, I think is a service to them, so, and, I know it's coming up pretty quickly here, but in the coming weeks, if any more information does become available. We've gotten questions on parking as one conversation. Obviously, questions on 8 stories versus 5 stories. Who are those workers going to be? Those kind of things. Would you mind actually going into parking a little bit if you do have an idea of that?
So we intend to use the city structures
Okay.
for parking. At this point.
We understand that it's like a chicken and egg
Yeah.
thing. You can't spend a lot of money writing the site plan until you own the property, and we can't tell the people what you're going to build on the property until we have a site plan. So I think what Mayor Pro Tem's trying to say is these renderings are great, and any more information, for example, the number of employees, including the interns, that kind of information will be very helpful.
Sure.
Yep.
So I can speak to a little of that at the moment.
Sure.
We have about 65. We are planning for about 65 for each office floor.
65 per floor?
Yes.
Nice.
Now, we have different shifts. We're not always in the building
Right.
at the same time. So, and we like to provide enough comfortable space for our employees. So, if that gives you an idea.
It does. All those
if
people
that could help
downtown.
with that question.
Definitely.
Thank you. Councilmember Gregg?
More of an observation than a question, but primarily feedback I've been getting on this is positive. The main question main point of concern that's come to me is the height of 8 stories. And I just personally wanted to point out that is considerably shorter than the other buildings that are currently under construction downtown. So although 8 stories is a considerably large office building, it is considerably smaller than what we currently have under construction, and will actually probably seem fairly moderate when it's sitting next to the Abbott and the
Right.
Center City.
Right. Councilmember Meadows.
Just in terms of the buy and sell agreement, it is the intention to execute this agreement prior to the vote. It makes reference to the vote, so it becomes pointless if the vote fails, I guess, but it is the intention for us to get this done before March 10th. Is that correct?
I believe we're working expeditiously to do that.
Okay, sounds good.
My name is Steve Owen, and I'm the Chief Legal Counsel at the Credit Union. The intention had been that we would not execute the agreement prior to the vote because that would be presumptive. The way in which the buy-sell agreement is written is that it is conditioned upon the ballot measure passing. So if the ballot measure doesn't pass, then it wouldn't be signed. If the ballot measure passes, then we'll continue doing the rest of the due diligence, and with as you'll see in the revised buy-sell, with a projected closing date of September 23rd.
Right, but why would you execute a buy-sell agreement that conditions on the March 10 vote? I mean, why would you execute it if the March 10 vote fails?
Because we wanted to communicate that there was no intention to enter into the agreement unless the ballot provision passed.
Okay. I'm not sure I followed that, but we'll be discussing this tonight, so
Yeah.
let's see what we can get done. Okay.
Well, and certainly we could do that as long as the buy-sell was written in such a way that if it didn't pass, we would be able to terminate the buy-sell agreement.
And I think that's clear from the buy-sell agreement, personally.
Well, and the reason for the discussion was that we didn't want the residents of East Lansing to assume that we would be purchasing the property and act in a presumptive way. But if the council wishes otherwise, we're happy to sign it and draft it that way.
I think we'll have that discussion tonight.
Good.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Sorry. Okay, so in terms of the purchase and sale agreement, the main thrust is here. It's conditioned on the voter approval in March. The purchase price is $810,000 as is, which was established by a city appraisal that was done in November. The city will provide title insurance, which will be a couple $1,000s. Standard warranties for the city. MSU-FCU will limit their building uses to those approved by the voters. And conditions prior to close include due diligence, including any of the approvals needed for the city, from the city for the project to move forward. As referenced by Mr. Owen, we did hear some comments over the weekend and made some changes to the draft, which were uploaded today under Section 12. Which essentially provides a close date of September 23rd, 2020, unless extended. And this is a date we feel is doable and provides the option for an extension at the council meeting on September 22nd in the event that unforeseen circumstances come up or there's a need for more discussion in the community. So with that, would take any additional questions that you have. The city attorney here is here as well.
Councilmember Meadows.
I have a few questions, so maybe Tom could step up here. I'm trying not to argue against our own position on some of these comments and questions, so I'll just point that out. Okay. In paragraph number 1, which talks about the purchaser's offer, in the last sentence it says use restrictions, zoning ordinances, and easements, if any. In other words, it's limited to those things that are, I think, in existence at the time of execution of the document, but it doesn't say that. And I'm wondering whether there was any discussion with regard to that language. And I guess I should ask you, have you had any discussion about this document? Or is this their document that we're now looking at?
We initially sent them a very rough draft based on some other buy-sell agreements that we had done. They made some changes that were sent back to us, and we've looked at those just briefly. I haven't had a lot of negotiations. I know Tom's been in contact with their legal counsel during this process, but I haven't had a lot of discussions with them. A lot of that language there is pretty boilerplate language on the subject to recorded building use restrictions, zoning administration, ordinances and easements.
But it doesn't limit it. In other words, we're in the process of maybe looking at significant zoning changes between now and June or September. And I would think that this document should be based on whatever's in effect at the date,
yep,
which I think needs to be
we'll
made clear.
Okay.
The down in the 2 sections that I referenced when I was addressing Alice's comment on 10E and F, I just want to make sure that language clearly states what I think it says, which and maybe it could be made just slightly clearer if E said agrees to limit building uses to only those approved by a majority of voters at a March 10, 2020 or later election. I don't want to limit, I mean, we could put this back on the ballot at some point too if for some reason.
The concept is that it would be limited to the current voter approval process at this time, but that there'd be some flexibility if later they wanted to change uses, they could go back to a voter approval and get voter approval to change uses. So that was intentionally drafted a little broader than just to focus on this ballot proposal.
Well, I'm just saying it could be actually clearer.
Okay,
And
we
so
can
I'm-
do that.
I'm asking you to take a look at
Yep.
that. And then I had a question about 12, because I wasn't quite sure what we were trying to do here. Sale shall be closed on or before September 23, 2020. Was the objective there to give us time to go through the planning process, to get back to council, to do the due diligence, everything before the closing would actually take place?
Yes, so that it would, the concept is that they have everything approved and in place before they have to purchase the property. That's how we've dealt with any purchasers for projects of this nature in the past.
And there was, I think the comment by Alice about the extension or the lack of language with regard to an extension. Is there language in here that provides for an extension? Because I don't see it either. So
That was supposed to be in there, but I don't know that I've reviewed this. Oh, it says, unless seller and purchaser agree to extend the closing date to allow purchaser additional time.
okay, all
So
right.
that was the extension. And the 23rd date was picked specifically because there's a council meeting in September 22nd in case we could get a final approval or need an extension at that date by
Okay,
council.
great. 18, the entire agreement. It's not quite as beefy as I remember our other provisions where we've entered into agreements with regard to this. So I'm just suggesting that we look at some of our other agreements to beef this up, to make sure we hit every archaic word that describes comments that are possible. And then I have a comment on the deposit, which seems extraordinarily low for a property of this value. And I'm just suggesting that I don't know what the negotiations have been with regard to this. The deposit is going to be returned if for some reason this doesn't go forward. But I do think we need a more significant deposit than $10,000 on this property.
And the draft was sent to them with that blank. That was their initial offer to us. I haven't had a chance to discuss that with staff as to whether that
I think
should
more
be.
in the nature of $100,000 is something that is more comfortable for me.
We have not engaged
anyway.
in those discussions.
I've never negotiated with a bank for their down payment on something.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
We're kind of going backwards on that. Number 21, the notice of hazardous waste or substances or and underground storage tanks. Generally speaking, that notice is supposed to go to the purchaser to say, hey, you have a responsibility. But the way it's worded, it looks like it also places a responsibility on us. I want to make sure it doesn't. So where it says it is prudent for each party, I would prefer to see it's prudent for the purchasing party to a agreement to take a look at that property.
Okay.
And then on the next page, 23C, I'd like to see some language in there that makes clear that any assignment would be subject to all of the conditions as to use of this property that are already stated in this document. And then just sort of a list of things that I didn't think were in the document but probably should be: an anti-merger provision, which I know you generally put in every agreement that we have. A reasonable cooperation provision, no third-party beneficiary provision, no personal liability. That's the two entities that are the subject of this agreement. We generally have a civil rights provision, and I feel like it should be in any purchase agreement that we have. We should be able to record it, and I didn't see that in the agreement. And I don't know whether it makes sense for us to execute this in counterparts or not, but if it does make sense to you, I think we should have that provision in there too. Okay. That's all I got.
That's it.
That's it.
Anybody else?
I want to express my opposition to making the contract more complicated than it needs to be. Just have to say it.
We're attorneys, we do that.
Yeah. I know it's your job and everything, but
What do councils do if they don't have 17 attorneys on the council?
it must be really boring. I feel bad for them.
We've got attorneys everywhere.
That's right, we're surrounded.
Okay,
Like a plague.
thank you. Mr. Yaden, Mr. Meadows are two attorneys. All set?
Yep.
All right, thanks a lot. The next item will be 6.2, fiscal year 21 through 25 general fund financial forecast.
So as Jill is coming up to pull this up, just quickly to mention for council that if people know this is sort of the kickoff of our budget process, the 5-year financial forecast.
Sounds like it should be
It is, it's pretty fun and exciting. There's a lot of fun coming up. So the 5-year financial forecast, we started probably doing it about 15 years ago, really helped us navigate some very tough financial period by giving us a longer shot, a longer look into the future. And that really is the point, to give us a big picture look into the future, to see the trends and how things are coming in terms of revenue and expenditures, and then be able to make decisions quick enough and early enough. And that really does help us in terms of our management. So obviously, this is the first step. After this, council will go back and we'll be presenting the full budget document to you in April, and then having all of our discussion at that point. So this is sort of the big picture look, and Jill will walk us through it and give you a chance to ask any questions that you have.
And before you do that, Jill, I did want to mention to the new council people, this 5-year forecast that Jill works on and that has been going forward since I've been here is something that outside groups look at as a best practice, because it's so much better than 1 year or 2 years. So I know it's a lot of work. And I remember when I first saw it, I said, oh, good, we get to feel bad for 5 years instead of just 1. But now now that things are turning around a little bit, either way, it's just excellent. So good work.
It's looking nicer, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so as George mentioned, this is a precursor to the budget. So obviously fiscal year 21 is a little bit better of a guess than the fiscal year 25, but obviously we do our best to project out that far, and really it gives us a roadmap to see here's where we think we might be if all things stay equal with what we know today. I'll kind of give an overall analysis at the very end, but I do want to kind of focus on the fact that this is general fund only. So during the budget, we talk about everything in the city, but this is general fund only. I will also remind you that the income tax activity is recorded in a separate fund. So all of the income tax money is going into a separate fund, not shown here. The amount shown here is really what's coming back to the general fund, okay, for discretionary use. Okay. So maybe what I'll do first, since there's a couple of new council members, is just go through the overall look of the document. So there's a table of contents, which will highlight what I'm going to say right now, but just so you know what's included in each section, you don't need to change this. Might be too hard. I'm going to go through it really quick.
We have the paper.
So you do have a hard copy. And she has it kind of blown up there because it's really small for someone to look at online. So the first 2 pages are risks and uncertainties. This is really our attempt at talking about big picture, things that could change that we don't have a lot of control over. You're going to see stuff in here about property taxes, income taxes, state shared revenue, PA 289, all those revenues that we rely on, big sources of revenue that can change very dramatically from year to year. Next 2 pages are noteworthy items, so this is kind of my commentary. So things that are changing specifically for East Lansing, significant changes from year to year, or outlying things that I wanted to point out. Pages 5 through 7 are the assumption tables, so every line has an assumption. A lot of it's CPI, a lot of it is based on just different factors that I can research. The long piece of paper is the forecast, and that's where I'm going to focus all my time in just a minute. After that, pages 9 through 12 are the taxable value analysis. This is actually quite interesting from my perspective anyway. It kind of gives a history of our taxable values. And then our city assessor goes through and says, here's the developments that we know are coming or expect to come in the next 5 years. He also factors in a CPI that the state provides us, so we have that for 21. Outer years are a guesstimate of 1.5%. But overall, it kind of shows you what drives our property tax revenue. So as property tax values go up, our property tax revenue goes up, unless we have changes in our millage rate. Then the pages 13 through 16 is the general fund revenue detail, so kind of more detail than what you're seeing on this page 8. So it goes into more detail, gives you more information. And then the last page, page 17, gives a little bit more information on the expenditures. So again, more of a breakout than what you're seeing on the face of the forecast. So now I'm going to jump to the legal-sized piece of paper. So here, revenues are at the top, expenditures are at the bottom. I show fiscal year 19 actuals. We show fiscal year 20's amended budget. We show our best guess at how we think we're going to end the year. So that's the fiscal year 2020 expectation. Then we jump into the 21 forecast and then each outer year. Down below, we have expenditures, and then the blue highlighted lines are the beginning fund balance and the ending fund balance. So another important piece of information on this forecast. At the very bottom, it shows you total fund balance as a percentage of operating expenditures. So I'll remind you that council has a policy in place of 8 to 15% as our goal or target for fund balance as a percentage of operating expenditures. And then the very bottom line under the box, I suppose, is the accumulation or use of fund balance. So how much of our savings account are we using or adding? So that's kind of the layout. Now I'm going to kind of highlight some of these items. So if I jump over something and you want information, please let me know. So property taxes, very top line. You can see that we had the decrease in fiscal year 20. That's due to the millage reduction. So we reduced 5 mills. That decreased our revenue approximately $4.3 million, $4.5 million, excuse me. You can see when we go out into fiscal year 21, we're actually expecting a 5% increase. So that's a pretty good increase. We have a 1.9% CPI factor from the state of Michigan. But because of all the growth and development in the city of East Lansing, we're seeing a 5% increase. A big piece of this is the hub. So that's about $20 million of value that was added that is not being captured. So of course, this takes into account all the capture districts as well. So this will be revenue to the general fund. Jumping down to the transfers from the income tax fund. You can see we budgeted $5.8 million. This includes making the general fund whole for the property tax millage reduction, and it includes the 20% public safety allocation. There's also a small piece, like $17,000 for sidewalks. Just, I'll throw that out there, but probably not too important. You can see that our year-end estimate is actually $6.2 million. So income tax, we're expecting it to come in better than what we budgeted. Damar will get up and talk about it in a little bit more detail, but at this point, the year-end estimate is based off closer to $10 million after refunds. So that's what this assumes. In the outer years, I'm using a 3% personal income growth assumption. I also did a quick 5-year forecast for the income tax fund. Of course, I have a lot of anxiety about the income tax money because we don't know what refunds are going to be. We're still assuming a 15% refund amount. If it's higher, not so good news. If it's lower, good news, means more money. But until we have a little bit of experience under our belts, I'm gonna have a little bit of anxiety and uncertainty over these numbers. So with the outer years, I'm assuming a 3% income growth. And then I, of course, need to factor in how much taxable value is growing. So that increases the transfer back to the general fund. And then how does that affect the 60-20-20 allocation? So all of that is factored into here. State shared revenue. This year, I'm actually not going to talk about it a lot because it seems to just be kind of a steady increase right now, kind of consistent with CPI. We did see some statutory revenue increases, minimal, but still some increases, and constitutional has also increased. So I went outer years similar to what we're experiencing in the current year. Jumping down to 289, so this is the fire protection money. big number for us this year, right? 3.2 million. We used to get 1.6, so that doubled. The state did pass legislation in December of 2018 to say that they're going to fully fund this, and they did. So outer years assumes it remains fully funded by the state of Michigan. This is subject to appropriation. It could change. At this point, we have no inclination or need to assume it's going to change, but this is also an uncertainty in the forecast. Okay, I'm going to then go to licenses and permits. So building and engineering permits, you can see in fiscal year 19 was actually $1.5 million. This year we expect it to come in a little bit closer to 1.2. So with all the large developments, they had large permit fees. And with that development slowing down, we're seeing a decrease there. We also assume that there's going to be a little bit more decrease into the outer years until it flattens out. Housing licenses, usually this is a line that stays pretty flat, but with all the new developments and the new apartments in the downtown, we're going to have more rentals to license. So we're factoring that in here in both fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 20. And then business permits, business and restaurant licenses, that's also going up, and that's because of the e-scooters, or the electronic scooters. So that's the licensing and ride fees in there. Then I'm going to go down to other revenue. Other revenue, and mostly, the bigger numbers here, I guess, are the BWL franchise. So that's a big piece of that line. We expect about $1.4 million from that in fiscal year 20. It also includes the ground lease with Center City. So that's why you're seeing an increase from 19 to 20 is the ground lease. That's prorated right now, so we expect about $120,000 of revenue from the ground lease this year. And then we expect a little over $200,000 in fiscal year 21. So that proration stops in September.
And $200,000 is the annual amount?
$200,000 was the base annual amount, and then there's a CPI factor.
Great.
Grant revenue, you can see there's a large decline in fiscal year 20. That's primarily due to 19 including some large fire grants. So they've received some grants for different equipment, the cots, breathing apparatus, those types of things. Fiscal year 20 includes some CDBG sidewalk funding. It includes the court grants. It also includes a portion of the new SAFER grant, which is the fire personnel grant that we have. So we got a grant for 3 firefighters to be added to our department, and that will start in fiscal year 20. The increase that you see out into 21 is because of the SAFER grant. It will be a full year of revenue from that grant. And then out in 23, you can see that it drops down 10%. That's because it's, again, another partial year of reimbursement for that grant. And out in 24, there's another decline, and that's because the grant will be complete at that point. Okay, so that's my revenue. Does anybody have any questions on revenue before I move on? Okay. On the expenditure side, I'm going to spend a little bit of time here on personnel, only because it's like 75% of our budget. So I'm going to touch on each line, some of them quicker than others. Salaries. In fiscal year 20, we're seeing a pretty large increase. It's almost 8%. This is due to a lot of positions being hired back. So we have a few police officers hired back, we have a few firefighters added back, and then on top of that, the 3 new positions from the grant. There's also a few other departments that had either part-time to full-time, but those were all discussed in the budget. Also, it includes a 3% cost of living adjustment for employees. In the outer years, we're assuming for next year a 3% cost of living. It also factors in any step increases, expected retirements, all those types of things. And then when we get out to fiscal year 22 through 25, we use a 2% cost of living adjustment, and we allow 1% for step increases and the normal kind of merit increases. Jumping down to retirement, you can see we're experiencing a 9.4% increase in fiscal year 20. Obviously, some of this follows salaries. The other piece is, as we have closed our pension plans for most employees, as those people retire, we're hiring more people under the new plan. So we really just have more people in our pension plan at this point. To positive thing that people aren't dying as quickly as people are retiring, but I'm sure you understand sometimes we're excited.
Positive?
Yes. In the fiscal year 21, we are seeing a 12% increase. With MERS, we actually triggered what they call a 3 times trigger, which means we have one division that is underfunded to the fact that they make us pay more, okay? So when we made our supplemental pension payment in December out of the income tax, we dedicated all of that $600,000 to that division in hopes to remove the trigger. In fiscal year 22, you can see a 14.1% increase. This is me trying to allow for the assumption change. So they're moving the investment rate of return from 7.75 to 7.35, which is going to negatively impact us. So they have some projections in the report. So I've used that to kind of come up with that increase. Again, it could change. And then in the outer years, you can see that it actually kind of levels out. I'll call it level when it's 4.9%, but a much smaller increase than what we have been seeing. So this is trying to play in all the supplemental payments that we're making, the assumption rate changes. The only other thing that I have not really been able to account for is they're talking about changing the mortality tables, life expectancy. So that may negatively impact us as well, but I don't really have a sense yet of what that amount's going to be, so that's not factored in here.
That's MERS is talking about that?
MERS, yes, and that will be affecting the fiscal year 23 amounts. So we won't know anything. It will be in the December 31st, 2020 valuation, which we'll get in June of 21. So we have a little ways before we'll know. Moving down to the supplemental DB retirement. So as you know, we made a $3.1 million payment already this fiscal year. This is in addition to anything that comes out of the income tax fund, so I just want to reiterate that. With the income tax, I believe we'll be close to $5.5 million as a supplemental payment in this fiscal year, which is significant. In the outer years, I made the assumption that between the income tax fund and the general fund, we wanted to reach a $5 million supplemental payment. Okay, so you can see some very large payments in here still, but they are decreasing as we expect the income tax to increase. The retiree health, this line reflects just the premiums that we pay for our retirees. So we do see some increases because retirees have a set benefit. Whatever our premium increases is what our retiree health costs increase. We use the actuaries' information for these amounts. That's the best information I have at this point. The next line, supplemental retiree health. So I talked about this last year, but the state passed legislation that says any employee that is guaranteed health care that's hired after June 30, 2018, we have to pre-fund their normal cost for retiree health. So kind of forcing us to fund their retirement health plan. We have allowed for $100,000. It started in fiscal year 19. We've continued to put $100,000 in here. The amount that we actually had to contribute in fiscal year 19 was $13,000. So we are just pre-funding OPEB, right? We have approximately $17 million sitting in our retiree health fund vehicle right now, but that's still like 40% funded, right? So yes, at some point we can use that money. I would not recommend at this point that we do that.
So what you're saying is we have a fund, we're trying to build it up to much closer to 100% funded before we start to use it. So we're paying our premiums for retirees just out of the general fund.
Correct.
Okay.
Out of pocket. There are other funds that pay for retiree health too, depending on where you're housed as you work here at the city. But a lot of it comes out of the general fund. Moving down to health insurance for actives. The state has some requirements in what they call the hard cap. So under Public Act 152, we fall under that. We try to reach that. So we are limited to a CPI increase that they provide us. So do I think health insurance is only going to increase 3%? No, but that's what we have to hold ourselves to, which means employees will be paying more. Or the plan has to change, I guess.
Party gets elected.
Jumping down to other fringes, you can see there was kind of a large increase in fiscal year 20. That was because we increased our healthcare savings plan. So employees used to get $500 per year. We are now getting $1,000 per year. And that basically aids those employees who don't have healthcare at retirement to kind of set money aside for future healthcare costs when they retire. Operating expenses, this is a line, so I'll say the personnel services in fiscal year 21. I'm pretty comfortable with those because we do what's called position budgeting, and that's kind of where we expect the numbers to fall even for the budget. Operating expenses are a little bit of a different animal. I basically take last year and inflate it a little bit. So for fiscal year 21, that's the one number I'm not 100% confident on, but it allows for some increases, some different contract services that people have asked for. And then in the outer years, it's really a CPI increase. The sidewalk program, usually, I'm gonna talk in the next two lines I'm super excited about, even though it's $150,000. So this is two lines that we normally have zeroed out for all outer years because we didn't have the funds to support it. So sidewalk program includes $50,000 of general fund dollars and $100,000 of CDBG dollars. Like I said, this is something that we used to bump down to 50 and say we're only going to spend $50,000 on hazardous sidewalks. So I'm happy to see that we're starting to put some money here into infrastructure and capital needs. Same with capital outlay. We used to zero this out. Capital outlay in fiscal year 19 is large. It's $590,000, and again, that's because of the fire stuff. So the fire equipment, they had some cots, the Lucas devices, some breathing apparatus. So that is that $590, and that was all grant funded. This year we have a little bit more fire equipment, and we have some election equipment that we purchased. So that makes up the $140,000. The outer years, there's no planned capital, but it kind of is out there for all departments from the general fund to kind of pull from. Moving down to the transfers out to other funds, Parks and Recreation, standard increase for them. It looks a little bit low for 21 because there's some one-time amounts in fiscal year 20 to help with some different capital needs that they have. The CIP fund, again, this is one where I'm happy to report that we have some big numbers in those outer years. In fiscal year 20, we had sent some money over to the CIP fund to make some facility improvements. This also includes the Avondale Square subsidy. So you may recall that we have some debt on Avondale Square that the TIF doesn't fully cover. So the general fund covers any additional amount that's needed. In the outer years, the Avondale subsidy is less than $100,000 each year, and there's more detail on page 17. I say that, but it might not be there. I might just have it in a separate place, but I can get you those numbers if you'd like them. But I also included in fiscal year 21, $650,000 for facility improvements. So we would move that money over to the capital improvement fund, and Tim McCaffrey and his team would be doing various facility repairs. I'm drawing a blank on what those are in the moment, but I know one of them is the fire panel here at City Hall, and I don't remember the other ones. Do you remember?
Was it fire station improvements, kitchen, the other improvements to the fire station?
Perhaps. So it's 650 in fiscal year 21, and in the outer years it's 500,000. So again, this is a spot where we used to just have the Avondale Square subsidy amount listed, but we feel at this point it's prudent to say we need to be making this investment, and this is what the plan would look like. This is what our 5 years would look like if we start making these investments into facilities. Then I'll just highlight real quick in the all others. Fiscal year 20 is an anomaly in that the general fund paid for the low acuity vehicle for the fire department. So about $250,000 was transferred to the garage fund to pay for that vehicle. And then in the outer years, it's simply the seniors, they have a modest transfer of about $140,000. There's some debt on some various facility improvements of about $50,000. And then there's very small amounts that go to the Art Fest and the Public Art Fund. And all that detail is in the back. So at the bottom, fiscal year 20, we have budgeted that we would use $767,000. It looks like we're gonna basically break even. A lot of that is due to revenue coming in better than expected. So transfer from the income tax, better than expected. Property taxes, slightly better than expected. So positive news. Moving into fiscal year 21, 100,000 to the good. I would call that break even still. When we get through the budget process, we'll have a better idea of where we're really at, but that's what we're working on now. Then you get out into fiscal year 22 through 25. You start seeing that we need to use fund balance. Not negative in my opinion, because there's a lot of assumptions in here. I am a conservative, so I'm a little bit conservative on the revenue and I'm conservative on the expenditures, so overall that could create some variances. But you can see in fiscal year 22, we're still close to 15% of fund balance. So that's the top of council's policy. It's not until fiscal year 24 that I'm projecting that we'd be below the 8%. So overall, I think this is a positive. I think it gives us a good roadmap. We know where our struggles are. We know what we need to invest in for the future. I think it's positive, and I think we don't want to get too excited that it's positive because there's a lot of things that can change. But it does show that we're on the right track. It shows that the income tax, the BWL franchise, all of these things have been positive for the city, and it's allowing us to do things that we haven't been able to do in the last 10 years.
So I just want to make sure nobody's too excited.
I always try to temper all of this.
Councilmember Meadows.
I just have a question about CDBG funds. Now, if everybody participates in the census this year, which I hope that we're really promoting, and I know we are, and we're above $50,000, I know that bumps us up into another category with CDBG funds, so we will be getting more money. Did you assume that we're going to be over 50?
I did not assume that.
Okay, so we're conservative on that as well. So thank you. I just wanted to indicate this is a conservative estimate that is likely to have some increased revenues with regard to it going forward. Okay.
And I wanted to comment, and I will every time I can, that this would not be positive without the income tax.
I agree.
So again, thank you to the taxpayers and the residents who supported that income tax, because otherwise we'd be looking at the same ugly picture we were looking at before. Okay, any other questions for Jill? Thank you, Jill.
You're welcome.
Next, we will have an income tax update. Oh, what a segue.
This is part of the quarterly update that council requested
Right.
regarding the income tax, so that's the regular update we'll be doing, and tomorrow we'll give a brief overview for council.
Okay.
Good evening.
Good evening.
She is pulling up the graphic
Okay.
for you guys. So I'm here to give an income tax update. I think the last time I came was in December, maybe December. Time is running together. It's tax season. So right now we are in the thick of it. Things are ramping up pretty quickly. We have about 1,476 withholding accounts that are currently active or withholding. You guys want me to pause and wait for the graphic to come up?
No, go ahead.
Right now, we are in the midst of filing season, so people are submitting their returns. Right now, we have returns, paper forms available at the library, here at City Hall, and on the website for taxpayers to get those. While our revenue numbers are looking good, I do want to caution that we do not know what refunds are going to be. As of February the 10th, we were just shy of 11.6 million, and that is strictly for tax year 2019. That's not anything that has come in this calendar year that's attributable to tax year 20. Total revenue is beyond that, but I wanted to focus on one tax year, just so that we can kind of get a sense of where we would be. As of that date, with the returns that have been filed, I'm sorry.
Can I just say one thing? I understand that all council members are going to refuse any refund, so I just want to bring that up.
That's why you interrupted him.
I did.
No worries. I do want to point out for returns that have come, that had been collected from as of February 10th, 52,000 of that 11.6 were from payments that were sent in with returns, which is a good sign. I do expect that to increase as people that generally tend to wait until filing deadline to file to hold on to their money as long as possible. And tax returns for the city are not due until April the 30th. Refunds aren't, for timely filed returns, aren't expected to be, don't have to be out until June 15th legally before we have to pay interest. So after the end of June, we will have a much better idea of what our refund situation looks like. But so far, oh, there's the graphic. So far, we're trending in the right direction. Does anyone have any questions for me?
So we're not expected to be paying any interest, right? We're going to get refunds out in time.
That is the plan. That is the plan.
That's a good plan. And you mentioned how many came in with payments. How many came in with refunds? Do you know?
So that's just the number, the dollars for returns, not the number of returns.
Oh.
So
I guess
we
it's
are getting tons of returns in every day.
I see.
So far, of the returns that have been coming in, about 675 of the over 1,000 have been refunds.
Okay.
And that's expected. People who are expecting refunds are going to file earlier
Sure.
than people that owe money.
Sure.
I had a question. Sorry.
Yep.
Recognized by the.
No, I recognize you.
Thank you so much. The blue estimates for the quarter, is that where we're seeing like business profit and loss?
So that is a
Or
combination.
What profit, I guess it would be.
So that is a combination of individual estimates and business estimates as well.
Okay.
It's a combination of the two.
So I'm just, because business profit is also subject to this tax, right? And
Correct.
a lot of businesses don't really know if they've made a profit until they wrap up their.
Correct. And the thing about the estimates for this 2019, there was no penalty for
Right.
businesses or individuals not making estimated payments. So I have
there
an
might be a
expectation
surge.
that a lot of those are going to come in as payments with returns.
Okay.
And next year we may see those numbers completely different. as
Assuming
the-
after a year, they would know a little bit more what their quarterly estimates should be, and they would
Correct.
be more on.
Correct.
so
Because
that-
then they would estimate based on their 2019 returns.
Right, okay.
Okay, anything else? Great, keep up the good revenue, work.
Thank you.
All right, next we have the city attorney plea bargain policies regarding the charge of driving while license suspended. Who is our, is Tom going to do that? Yep.
Hi.
Hey, Tom.
Last January, we were here to discuss our general plea bargain policies, and I was asked to come back with a focus for some changes for our driving while license suspended policies. So we did that. I do want to clarify a couple of things Mr. Jackson said. When he was talking about people charged with no operator's license in possession in district court, that's when there's the initial charge. So if you forget to put your license in your car, in your wallet, and you're driving and you get caught, the police will give you a ticket for no operator's license in possession. Those are the fines that are universally waived if you show your license, and that's true in this court as well. Okay. So that's a different charge at the start. What we end up plea bargaining to is the charge of no operator's license in possession sometimes, because it goes from a 2-point suspended ops charge to a 0-point misdemeanor. And the reason that they kept that a misdemeanor when they made civil infractions throughout the traffic code was because if someone didn't have an operator's license to present to the officer needed the discretion to be able to make an arrest if he couldn't if he wasn't comfortable with the identity that the person was giving him. Normally they just ticket somebody, but if somebody says, my name's John Doe, and the officer is suspicious about that or can't verify that, then they can make a custodial arrest and find out who the person actually is. So that's why that remained a criminal offense when they made all the speeding tickets and everything else civil infractions. So I just wanted to clarify those remarks. So what we have here is the first column is the city's current plea bargain offer. And again, the current plea deals do have a $500 fine for all of the driving while license suspended operators charges that are reduced. Again, it was our longstanding belief that because we were giving a good deal on the low end as to what they ultimately were pled guilty or responsible to, that the $500 was warranted as one of the detriments or one of the reasons people shouldn't drive while their license was suspended. So the proposed offer was pretty much brought into conformity with the current Ingham County Prosecutor's Office deals. It's a little higher. Some of that is because the city doesn't retain all of the funds for these charges, so the state gets their share of certain charges, particularly no operator's license in possession. $200 of that goes, $200 of the $325 goes to the city, and $125 goes to the state. For the civil infraction, when it ends up as a civil infraction, $175 of the $215 goes to the city and $40 to the state. So when it's $155, $115 again goes to the city and $40 to the state. So we haven't matched the Ingham County Prosecutor's Office. And one of the things that the prosecutor's office does do, if someone has their ticket cleared up right away, they'll just dismiss. We don't do that, and we don't recommend doing that, simply because then you're opening yourself up to civil liability, where we otherwise can foreclose it here with the type of plea bargains that we do offer. So
Can you go into that a little bit more?
yeah, the if the charge is dismissed, that allows people to claim that there was no probable cause to stop to begin with, and that we violated their constitutional rights. A policy that we've instituted a few years ago when the civil infraction judgments, we actually put on there the judgment that there was probable cause to stop. So that's something that they agree to in order to get the civil infraction, because we've been burned on a couple of occasions where we've issued a civil infraction and then people have brought litigation against the city because that wasn't considered a judgment that would have precluded a federal lawsuit. So we actually amended our judgment form to have that, so that if people are going to take our civil infraction offer, we're at least protecting the city from the liability of a judgment in federal court.
Councilmember Meadows?
Yeah, I think that's actually a legitimate concern. But why can't we have a judgment with no fine then?
Yeah.
I mean, if clear dismissal, it doesn't have to be clear dismissal, but why have the fine? Why not just say, I plead guilty and there's no fine for the civil infraction?
We could do that.
That was actually my question as well. And would that satisfy that concern then?
I think we can do that. I'd have to do a little bit of research, but from the top of my head, I think that's not a problem.
I think if they're already pleading to something that says that there was probable cause to arrest me, but there's not going to be a fine, I think it meets your concern.
There should be.
Okay.
We should be able to accommodate that. There was some case law out there a while back that talked about dismissals and exchanges for non-prosecutions was problematic, but it shouldn't be under this circumstance.
Okay. Is that it then? Is this the only one we're looking at?
We just want to do whatever council wants us to do,
Okay.
and that's all we've ever.
Yeah. Councilmember, Mayor Pro Tem?
So one, I just need to say that this memo was very well done, and I think it categorized comparisons to the county, what we're doing right now, and proposed and reasonings behind it in a really well done way. So I just wanted to give you kudos for that. I have a question on the last case that we had mentioned. So driving a license suspended while the driver has no license, but the suspensions have been cleared. So this is when they've never actually been issued a license then. So my only concern with this, and I understand where our our policy sits at, and this is something that I want to bring up to council, is just undocumented folks. We do have several many in the community can't get Michigan issued license right now. There's been a push on the state level to do that, obviously, to no avail. And so in situations like this where they might have never been issued a license in the first place, I could see this as a potential issue. And so I wanted to put that out there as part of my reasoning and
Your reasoning for what? Making
For-
it 0?
for wanting to see the civil infraction
Instead of a misdemeanor.
instead of the misdemeanor. That's just as more of a concern that I think is more specific to our community. But I think it might be warranted. And so I want to put that out there as an idea to the rest of council. And then my next thing is, I've gotten some questions from community members, from the HRC. Can you just kind of run us through like what this process is on council kind of assigning plea bargaining policies? Do we need to do this through a resolution? Is this more of will of the council? Is this something we need to have formal in writing, or is this kind of just, yeah?
Well, it hasn't been a formally approved resolution in the past. It's just that, we work at the will of council, and if we're not doing the council's will, we don't expect to work very much longer. So we always, try to understand where council is as a general rule on all of these, and then go along with that. We need to have the discretion, because there's so many variables in so many of these cases that you can't really put them in. I mean, we have to actually mete out justice too, as a result of the plea bargain. Sometimes it's more lenient than the plea offer. Sometimes it's a little harsher than the plea offer, the general policy would allow. So we prefer not to have a written policy resolution, but we always try to do what council's will is.
I do have one question. And I think during his comments earlier, Mr. Jackson had not had a chance to review these, but one of the comments that he had made was some sort of ability for the court, which I assume would be the judge, right, to have a fee set based on circumstances. So I think, we are very... I think the interest in the council in changing these is really to not target people who are in a poverty situation that has led them into this. But then we also, I assume that there's probably just scofflaws at some point who are just kind of, and I frankly don't mind if they pay a higher fee, but I'd like to not mandate a higher fee. So is there a way to...
We discussed that in my office, and the concern is how do you make the determination of who's truly indigent and who's not, and then do we really want to apply, where's the line for that, where's the, so our preference is to just have a policy that's equitable to everyone across the board, and go with that, rather than to say, well, you walked in with a Kate Spade purse, so we're going to charge you extra, versus somebody who didn't.
I'm impressed.
Aren't those expensive?
I'm impressed that you threw a fashion word out there.
Aren't those
Well
expensive
done.
purses?
Yes, well
I don't know.
Fair. I think, totally. I would much rather err on the side of being more fair to our more vulnerable citizens. So just...
Councilmember
I
Meadows.
just want to confirm that even though you may plea bargain, the judge doesn't have to accept that. They generally do, but ultimately the judge decides what the fine might be and what the penalty might be.
Well, if they accept our plea bargain, we're setting the penalty.
Correct.
So we'll do whatever council wants us to do in that regard, because this is the deal where we do get to set the amount they pay, because that's part of the plea bargain, is they pay a specific amount of money. So if council thinks these numbers are high, we're happy to change them.
So let's just talk about that. Right now, we have if cleared, a civil infraction at $155. I heard Councilmember Meadows were you thinking that would be something that should just be waived?
That if cleared a civil infraction, that the fine would be waived
not the.
but not the plead to the.
And I think the one caveat in that is I think we're still gonna have to charge the state fee, otherwise the court's gonna have to pay that out of its own pocket.
And how much is the state?
$40 for that.
Yeah.
Seems totally fine.
So, okay, well, that takes care of every
It does-
issue,
it does.
actually, so, okay.
Yeah.
I echo Councilmember Stevens' feeling on the final category with the misdemeanor at 325. I'd rather
Well,
see.
hang on, can we
Okay.
finish this
Oh,
one? I'm
okay.
sorry, I just
All
want
right.
to make sure we have the whole thing.
Yep.
So $40 there, and then if not cleared, civil infraction at $215. That seems,
I'm fine with it, with the suggestion, other than I was concerned about that first one.
okay, sorry, go ahead.
So just to clarify, that
Can we
is when there's
scroll up to
no
that next
prior record of court interaction and prior suspensions. And then on our next page, this is the longer court record. So this one would be somebody that has demonstrated a pattern of, it seems
Of
fine.
violations.
Yeah, yeah. So really, my only other issue with it is in the final category on the last page, and, echoing Councilmember Stevens, or Mayor Pro Tem Stevens' comment that this is particularly dangerous to a very vulnerable class of people, which are people who are, in this country illegally. I personally am of the opinion that most, illegal immigrants are not here for some nefarious purpose, but really just here for, work and, living their life. And so to put those people in a position where something that was essentially out of their control, where they were not able to have a license and then are charged with a crime that could be used in a deportation, I would rather see that taken out, so.
So what would it be then?
Civil infraction.
Civil infraction with no fine?
Oh, no, I think some fine is
No,
still
Okay.
appropriate, but I think not a misdemeanor level.
What do you think about that, Mr. Yaden? Is that problematic in any way?
No, I'm just not sure. We haven't done any studies to see how many people this actually impacts, so my suspicion is for the handful of people you're protecting, there's a larger population that's going to be getting a really good deal. But that's, if council wants to do that in order to protect, I don't want our people trying to make a determination of whether somebody's here illegally or not, and so.
I think, bringing it more into line with what Ingham County is
Yeah, it's
doing
not
makes me feel like it's not completely out of the realm of reasonable.
The 215 there?
Well, just that it's a civil infraction at
Okay.
the county level as opposed to a
That's the only
misdemeanor.
change, right?
Just-
Civil
Yeah.
infraction instead of, but the money stays the
I
same.
think the money is
Yeah,
fine.
Okay.
I agree.
Aaron can argue with that, but.
I'd be fine to just change it to 215, unless there's like a very strong reason to have it at a higher rate.
Well,
But
there actually are fiscal ramifications to everything we're doing. Do you have any estimates of those, George?
So I think Mr. Yaden had the best sort of ballpark estimates, because there's so many moving parts. I think you put a number of $50,000 if we followed what he recommended. So everything that we're reducing below that would take more than $50,000. But there was lots of moving parts in the memo, so I think that that's really a ballpark estimate. I don't think you can say it's exactly that.
My reaction to lowering the number is, I'm happy with the number. I think there's two objectives here. One, to be fair. The other one is to maybe prevent this from happening in the future. In other words, if you are incapable of getting a license, you shouldn't be driving. Even though, we understand why you might have to or need to, and this kind of tells you, I better figure out a way to take the bus. So, I'm okay with that, fine, personally.
So do you feel directed?
I do.
Anything else?
just like a quick comment on this. So then process-wise, this doesn't need to go back to a regular council meeting. This
I will incorporate these changes into our plea bargain policy that I brought, or that I showed you last time, and we'll just publish it to the council that these are the general policies we will be following.
And I also just want to establish in the council, because we are putting these out there as a as kind of like what our baseline is, that I also am very open to the city attorney's office having discretion in situations that or other than this, obviously we listed a lot of plea bargaining policies at our last meeting, in situations where people might be might not be able to pay certain fees, and I'm 100% okay with, I mean, I can only speak for myself, but in situations, our plea bargaining policy might be set at a higher fee if the city attorney's office believes that somebody has a special situation that needs care, then I am obviously very open to that, and I hope that that is reflected in the
Historically,
council.
we've done that. Historically, we feel our plea bargain policies have been generally a little more lenient than other communities, especially with regard to the reduction in non-criminal offenses. I think maybe that's changing a little more in other communities, and the civil infractions are becoming more popular. But historically, civil infractions were only traffic offenses, and we were one of the first communities to make them apply to other types of offenses in the community, and then the kind of state followed our suit and came up with state civil infractions and municipal civil infractions. So we'd actually been, City of East Lansing had been going the civil infraction route for a long time.
Okay, I want to check this one off. Thank you, Mr.
Sure. Thank you.
6.6, background on University Place project, and,
I think you missed the TIF.
oh, sorry, did I skip? Yeah, oh, I double checked. Review of council policy regarding TIF, tax increment financing. Mr. Fehrenbach. This is interesting stuff, by the way. This is the whole thing is
Lawyers and
tax.
economists.
Yeah.
We need more artists on this one.
Yeah, the lawyers parts are boring. Do a tax dance.
Good evening again. This is really just a review of council's policy that you enacted in September of 2017, just to make sure it's still in alignment with the council's desires. So I'll begin with just a brief background on TIF. Essentially what it is tax revenues that are redirected for redevelopment activities. And those new taxes can be generated either through new development or just the normal inflationary increases. It does require approval of a TIF plan. In East Lansing, we have TIF plans for the DDA, the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, and the Smart Zone LDFA. In terms of kind of how the process works, essentially you would start with an existing value. In this example, it's $1 million. And then the incremental value would be, in this case, a redevelopment, would be created then by the redevelopment of this property. In this example, it would increase the taxable value by $5,000. So we have a total value of $6 million in this example. And in terms of taxing jurisdictions, we have the cities operating in solid waste funds and the library. Those would be the city's mills. Then we have the county, LCC, CATA, et cetera. Debt is not capturable and therefore is in red in this example. So in terms of the total millage rate, you're looking at about just over 72 and just about 66 of that would be capturable. So in this example, you would have the base value. Those mills would continue to flow to the jurisdictions. As far as the incremental value, the mills that would not be capturable, so the debt in this instance, the increment would be experienced in that case and continue to flow to those jurisdictions. And then the captured mills would create the TIF revenue that would go to reimbursable eligible expenses in this brownfield example. So this example assumes 100% capture, and sorry, I didn't know I had that function on. So in this example, the 66.2 mills that are captured is about $331,000, of which at the current rates, about 25% of that would be captured from city revenues, and the rest would be the non-city captured mills. So in terms of the DDA, there's a number of eligible activities. Mostly we focus on public infrastructure and paying off debt related to property acquisition several years ago that we're all familiar with, and also some downtown marketing and sidewalk projects that focus on ADA compliance as well. In terms of brownfield eligible activities, environmental responses, assessments, demolition, asbestos and lead remediation, water, sewer, roads, public and private partners, parking, site prep work. These are all eligible activities under the state's guidelines. In 2017, the council enacted a TIF policy, creating some criteria for our for your consideration as you review TIF plans. That we do require a minimum investment of $1 million, that the developer is in good standing with the city, and then there's a number of approval criteria, the main thrust of which is placing a priority on the remediation of environmental contamination and enhancements to public infrastructure. And beyond that, projects are really only considered if there's a substantial public benefit, and that can be defined in a number of ways, including but not limited to job creation, community impact, the duration of the plan, the fiscal impact. Your policy does state that less than 100% capture is preferred, but that it will be taken on a case-by-case basis. That may be something you want to think about. I certainly have heard from the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority sort of a change of thinking that because you're able to leverage the 75% non-city mills, and it also has the effect of speeding the process along and having plans with shorter durations, that maybe you might want to reconsider that. And then we do have an application process and fee. It's 1% of the capture for the fee, the application fee, which is a max of $25,000, and then basically depending on the size of the plan, there's a kind of a sliding scale, maxing at, I think, $15,000 for the annual brownfield fee. So just some recent examples: the Trowbridge Hotel, the Spring Hill Suites and retail. You can see there was a total investment of about $10 million, $1 million of which will be reimbursed as eligible expenses, which is mainly related to asbestos. It's a 75% capture and an expected 11 to 13 year payback. And just the note that if it were 100, you would expect that payback to go between 7 and 9 years.
Hang on, could you go
Yep.
back? So that's true that it would go between 7 and 9 years, but we wouldn't get that 25% of property taxes for those years either.
That is correct, yes. And neither would the other taxing jurisdictions,
Right.
yep. So Center City, total investment about $125 million. There's about $25 million of eligible expenses plus interest, mainly related to the parking structure and public infrastructure. Developer funded bonds to pay for the infrastructure, which will be repaid with the TIF. It's a 30-year plan, 100% capture. The city owns and operates the parking structure with about 305 spaces for the public, and then we leased the land for the retail and the 55 and over building on Albert. For that, ultimately will be $200,000 a year. We'll also experience new personal property income and income tax and parking revenues. And then the last recent example, Park District, it's about a $102 million investment. It's about $6 million of eligible expenses, which is mainly related to public infrastructure. It's about a 9-year duration with 100% capture. And again, we'll experience new personal property and income tax revenue for the city. So with that, be happy to take any feedback, questions, comments that you have.
So before this, we didn't have a policy. It was just like they discussed it every time and did what they were going to do. And so what we tried to do in 2017 is have some kind of policy that 5 people could agree on, and that's what we came up with.
Well, it also reflected what we've been doing, which at least since 2015, environmental and public infrastructure, and sorry, we're not paying for your parking, which had been requested by a lot of developers. So it did reflect that.
George?
It also gives staff very good direction, clear direction to be able to tell developers when they're coming in. We can say, this is council's policy, it's environmental remediation, and it's public infrastructure, and then it sort of saves people a lot of time and effort. So that clear direction to us helps us give clear direction to everybody else.
And because we're allowed to by our own policy to pay for remediation, doesn't mean that we have to. So it's something that we're allowed to go to, or even infrastructure, even our own infrastructure. Councilmember Gregg?
Well, as was pointed out earlier in the meeting, my main opposition to the TIF is that 75% that's being taken from our neighboring jurisdictions. I feel like we've got a responsibility to be a good regional partner. We have arguably a higher median income than some of our surrounding neighbors, and just because we can take their money doesn't mean we should. So I can definitely, it is a tool, it's a development tool that we can use. I think there's probably some situations that it's appropriate. I do have a problem with paying for environmental remediation in people's buildings that they own and then want to improve the value on. I feel like that is, if you want to increase the value of your building, you can take care of your own lead remediation. So it would have to, brownfield wise, it would have to be a pretty serious environmental cleanup in order for me to support that. And then, in terms of public infrastructure, if it's our infrastructure, I mean, we should pay for it. So I, in general, opposed for those reasons. Yep.
So that would be a really good argument for not having the 100%. I mean, you could take, you could take partial advantage of the leverage and not take all of
I'd be
it.
much more in favor of 30%, and even if it meant a longer term, because more of that money would be returned to our regional partners. Although we would be taking their money for longer, it's the same amount pool, it works out, but
Right, but they would get taxes right away,
Yes,
and they would
right.
get significant taxes because they are 75%.
Right.
Councilmember Meadows, hang on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, that entire position is permitted by this policy.
Right.
I mean, it really is about
Max.
each development proposal being judged on its own merits and us deciding what we're going to do with regard to it. It can be nothing. I mean, we could just say, hey, we're not doing TIF. So it's permitted under this policy.
Mayor Pro Tem?
No, I'd echo those statements. I think the comments that Mr. Ager made too were along the same lines, and that it has, I think, been a concern, definitely. And so, I am definitely. I mean, we've seen 75, 100, right? And so I'm definitely open to the idea. So I guess you had said that was kind of a point of contention, a point of conversation. I mean, where is that conversation started and stemmed from, and where do you think it's leading?
It's just my perceptions from the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority's conversations for the last 2 or so years that I've been paying attention here, and just the sense that I think they prefer the duration of the plan to be as short as possible.
And 100%.
Yes,
I
and,
mean,
and so
I've
if you go to
talked
100%, that's the effect that it has, essentially.
But I've also talked to a couple of those members who say, if we can leverage all this money, we should. I mean, everybody else does it, so why not? Councilmember Babcock, did you have something? Oh, I thought you were saying. So interestingly, the last time we talked about the environmental remediation, I said exactly the same thing. I said, if you're going to buy this property and it's got lead on it, then you need to know that before you buy it. But they buy it with the proposal that we would clean it up. And I was outvoted on that last time, so I'm looking forward to the next vote on this. I feel like I might have.
I think there are two. All environmental contamination is not the same. So if we go back to Joe Goodsher's proposal on Spartan Avenue,
Right.
that was really a historic gasoline station spill that was being remediated by an order of the DEQ. But if you're going to build underground parking, we needed the whole thing cleaned up. And it isn't just his property, it's spread all the way over to the Red Cedar River. So we made a decision, we'll pay for that, but we're not paying for anything else.
Yeah.
So
that would be a prime example of
Right.
something where I could be convinced that there was a regional benefit to using the tool that would make that cleanup as quick and as clean as possible, right? So,
Mayor Pro Tem?
I would just say that I echo Councilmember Gregg's comments. I echo the mayor's comments. So you might have a couple of more people in support of maybe a stricter guideline on that.
So I think the direction is the same because it allows us to do what we want to do, right?
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Okay, now we're going to University Place projects, so you can stay there.
We should just stack everybody's, like, you know, if it's the same staff member, we should put them all on the same
We should,
page.
we should.
You don't need to sit down, right?
Okay, so the University Place project is 3 units. We probably think of it as the Marriott building and the MAC garage, as well as an office tower. It was developed in 1986. The city owns the land, and it includes the 3 units, the parking garage, which we own and operate, the hotel, which is owned by Columbia Sussex, who also operates it as the Marriott, and the office building, which they have also acquired recently. Just to note, there are members from the Columbia Sussex team here tonight, if you do have any questions for them. So in terms of the lease details on the ground lease, the initial term was for 40 years, and that will end in March of 2026. Beyond that, there's 4 10-year extensions available, and the first extension would be valued at approximately about $550,000 a year, and that would be payments that they would need to make to the city. And it's based on a land determination agreement. We can give you more details on exactly that if you have questions. But essentially, it's split between the office and hotel. The buildings will become owned by the city at the expiration of the lease. So if they decide not to exercise the options, any of the options, then the buildings as well as the land will be the city's. Recently, Columbia Sussex has made an offer that's in your packet tonight. Essentially, they are offering $3.5 million for the ownership of the land, which would they would retain the hotel and office buildings, and the lease would essentially terminate. It's based on a net present valuation for real estate investments, and it's discounted from that net present value for the underlying economics of the office tower that they've indicated. We have not seen any actual data behind that, or had a chance to analyze that. It would require a sale of this property, certainly would require approval by the East Lansing voters, so that's something to take into consideration. In terms of the pros, obviously the $3.5 million of cash for the city's purposes. We would continue to maintain the ownership and operation of the parking garage, and the project is likely to remain taxable. One note is we are currently capturing about $160,000 a year of TIF that is servicing debt issued in relation to the parking structure improvements. In terms of the cons, we would forego substantial future lease payments beginning in 2026, or if they decided not to make those, we would forego ownership of the office tower and hotel building. Staff in our initial estimations really feels that the $3.5 million is an undervaluation. It doesn't account for the buildings that would become ours. Also, in their estimations of net present value, it's really based on kind of real estate returns, which are kind of apples to oranges with kind of the city's real rates of returns for our investments. And also in terms of a con, the public ownership would likely make the project tax exempt, which would eliminate the $160,000 of TIF revenue that's going to the parking fund to pay for that debt. So some big policy questions for the council to consider is really, should the council consider asking the voters to approve a sale of the property either at their proposed price or at some fair market value? Does the council have a desire to have staff explore a renegotiation of the ground lease on terms that are more palatable to Columbia Sussex while also acceptable to the city? Or should staff explore other options regarding potential arrangements, including renegotiating the terms of the lease? For instance, we could renegotiate the hotel-only portion and retain ownership or take control of the office tower, et cetera. So those are the big questions for you. I'd be happy to answer any of your questions. And again, Columbia Sussex folks are here if you have any questions for them.
Councilmember Meadows.
Just really a comment more than anything else. I think we have before us at this point an actual offer to purchase, right?
Yes, it's a non-binding letter of interest,
Okay.
essentially.
Because this gives me a little discomfort. We are able to consider purchase or lease a property in a closed session, and we run the danger. I know that transparency is very important, but we run the danger of actually negotiating against ourselves if we start to discuss what our bottom line might be, what we might want to do in that regard. I think if the question is, are we willing to accept this offer at this moment in time? My feeling is I am not personally willing to vote to accept this offer for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think it's premature because it doesn't sound like we've had any negotiations with regard to this. But also, even if we go to 2026 and we begin to, we capture, $5 million in 10 years in terms of lease payments. And so, we really, I don't see the financial advantage to a one-time payment of $3.5 million to us. It doesn't really address the long-term issues that the city sees. So I'm not interested in that number anyway. I'm not opposed to having further negotiations, but I think that we should have a very lengthy discussion about our options and where we might want to go appropriately in a closed session so that we don't end up negotiating against ourselves.
Mayor Pro Tem?
I'm going to say this every single time. I love these kind of presentations. This gives a really good perspective, and it kind of weighs our options, and I think a very not only transparent, but a really good way for myself and I think others to digest. So I'll agree with Councilmember Meadows and the fact that I'm not willing to get on board with the offer as it stands right now. And I will say that, if the will of the council is to go with a sale, I do think that going to an open market might be a better option. I'm not saying that won't end up being the same buyer. I just, I think that's probably a better choice for the city, and I'm open to a renegotiation of ground lease on terms that might be more palatable. I'd like to hear a little bit more about potential arrangements, options, unique ways staff thinks. This is an asset for the city, and I think this could be something that could be very beneficial to us. So both either financially or just operationally. So I think that's my sense.
So,
I can go after you.
okay, so I don't understand why we would renegotiate, or why we would negotiate price. If we do nothing, we either own a building or get $500,000 a year. I think we're finished. I would never sell, given those two options. We'd own a huge part of the downtown, yes.
Well, there could be options that have, some sort of a splitting the difference where something could happen before that, even now, we're not waiting 6 years, where there's something that, potentially lets them continue on an operation. Obviously it's been a very successful business in our downtown that we like having a successful hotel. So there could be some other options where there's a resolution earlier that is favorable to the city and favorable to them. So I think that's maybe something we'd like an opportunity just to discuss and explore.
I guess I
and
hadn't
then-
thought about
And
the
bring that
idea.
to council.
Yeah, because we can't
So I understand what
really-
you're saying is that sort of
we
the
can't-
bailout offer
yeah.
of the do-nothing option is favorable, but there might be something that we could do before that and having further discussion with them to come back to council.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about our probable inability to run a hotel.
I think also they've indicated that the payments at the current estimated rates are not going to be palatable. So basically what they're positing is that, you know, we will end up with those buildings and not the payments. So there
Gotcha.
may be somewhere in
Something
between.
I
where-
asked that question because I thought that was in regards to the office building, but not necessarily the hotel, or is that?
Well, the office and hotel split the
Okay.
payment, and I think what they've posited, they can speak for themselves if they'd like, but is that essentially the office portion at that current rate is not going to be able to be supported.
Okay, Councilmember Gregg.
Well, I think I'd kind of like to hear what before I spout off my random opinions.
My name is Derek Cott. I'm with Columbia Sussex and Vice President of Finance. I think what we're trying to say is we started to try to have this discussion about opening up the negotiation for extending the lease some time ago, prior to us owning the office building. But the office building owner, previous owner, would not extend the lease because it doesn't make any money. And he didn't want to contractually obligate himself to a lease term for expenses that he couldn't pay. Given our relationship with our long-standing owner of the hotel, we bought the hotel in 1994, was a Holiday Inn. We've converted it to a Marriott. We've refurbished the hotel multiple times. I think we've been a good corporate citizen. We are not a hotel, we're not an office building operator. We bought the office just to have the ability to have the discussions with the city with just two parties. Is that the owner of the office was not going to extend the lease, which would have put us, we would have had to wait till 2026 and not be able to do anything. So we wanted to just push allow for the discussion. We made the offer to purchase because we thought the city wanted that as an option. We're happy to look at different ways to evaluate the ground lease, but based on the kind of 60-40 split, the hotel pays 60% of the cost, and the condominium, the office condominium pays 40%. If you look at those numbers, a $200,000 type payment to a building that doesn't generate that kind of cash flow, it can't do it. So we want to just open up the conversation to make a situation that hopefully is win-win for both. Maybe we start paying well before 2026 rent, which kind of helps the process now. But given the valuation and the level, it makes the office unsustainable as it is. And like I said, we probably would like in a long-term situation, although it's, and we've been very active trying to get new people to come into that building. We've signed up a few new tenants, but keeping tenants and getting new tenants into the building is in a rate when you consider your top kind of gross rents are around $18, $19, $20 in a full-service office building, and your costs are, say, $10 to $11 a foot. And we have no debt on that property, so it doesn't make any money before a lease payment, or it makes very little money before a lease payment and before any debt payment. So if we sold that building, essentially somebody would put debt on it. That'd be another expense. So there really isn't a viable a viable alternative for the office without some renegotiation of the lease stream. So we just want to open that discussion. We want to have a fair and open sharing of information, and hopefully come to a situation. I mean, obviously the document is what the document is. I think the best situation is us to sit down with your staff and hopefully we can come up with an idea on the lease that makes sense for everybody. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I don't think it hurts anyone to have that negotiation and see what happens.
Councilmember Gregg.
Cool. Sounds like I'm in, sympathetic agreement with you. I have absolutely no interest in owning or operating a hotel, but I can think of about 50 things that I could do with an office building. So I would love to figure out a way for you guys to keep being the great, partner that you have been in having a, lovely downtown, well-maintained, beautiful hotel. And then, I want to start a retail incubator program. I'd love to expand our TIC program. Like, there's a lot of things that I would do with an office space. So if you are, amenable to complicated possible things
From our
like that.
standpoint, we're a hotel operator. We're a hotel owner-operator. Been in business since 1972. We're the largest franchisee of full-service Marriotts in the country. So you know, we love this market. We've been in it for a long time. We didn't sign this lease. We stepped into it when the previous owner went into default on their note. Michigan National Bank, who was a customer of ours, brought us the transaction, and we bought it as a Holiday Inn. Like I said, we've converted it to a Marriott. We think that brand is the right brand for this market, and intend to be here for a long time if the city and us can hopefully work out a situation that makes it a...
Just one final point, not
Yep.
related to you. This whole thing just speaks to my general distaste for like complicated public-private partnerships, just in general going forward.
Except for you want to put complicated things in there.
Well, I mean, if it's complicated, I'd like to get the best part out of it for
All
us,
right.
now that it's already done 40 years ago by somebody else, but let's not do it again.
Yeah, I don't want my earlier comments to be taken as not wanting us to continue to discuss this matter. I just don't. I'm not interested in selling that property for $3.5 million.
Just as a
but I do
point-
want to. I want to
Oh, sure.
qualify one thing. I know that we had a right of first refusal on the office building. Correct? Did we assign that right of first refusal to you guys, or?
I don't know. I think that would have been the previous owner, if he had one. No, I don't know if there was one or not.
We decided not to exercise that right.
I know we didn't exercise the right, but I wasn't sure whether we assigned it or we just bailed on it.
I'll
And I
have
wanna
to check that out.
Check that out. Because we had the opportunity, we just, this was 4 years ago, and we clearly did not have the resources to do anything with this. I think we're in a different position now and willing to talk about this.
I think downtown is different now than
Right,
it was.
downtown is different as well, yeah. So.
I think the point we were trying to make with regard to the structure of the lease, it was done in, I think, just a general in our view and sort of where we're at on the lease stream is, if you look at the lease is defined as the 13%, I believe, of the fair market, 12% of the fair market value of the land. And I think back at that time, treasuries, 10-year treasuries were trading in between that 10 and 9 or 10 or 15%.
Yeah.
So it was a very logical lease concept at that point. Treasuries today, 10-year treasuries 1.6, probably in the last 5 years has traded in the 3 to 4% range, and you're more likely to see interest rates at a low period of time, so for a long period of time forward. So it just makes the concept of what the idea of that lease stream was going to be was to make it more like a treasury yield. It's clearly not that today. Typically, in my experience, most hotel leases, I don't know much about offices, we don't really do that. We bought this just to be in this situation to kind of control our own destiny directly with you guys, are based on a percentage of revenues. So as the hotel does well, the ground lessor does better as the economy comes down. And there can be negotiations with regard to minimums, a minimum standard, and then up and down from there. So that's more what we would see a market type equivalent for how at least the hotel portion of a operating lease or a ground lease section would work. But again, I think it's more for the staff and you guys to give some direction as to whether you would prefer us to just deal with renegotiating potentially the lease and come up with an idea, which seems maybe to be the more palatable from what I'm hearing versus buying the real estate. But we're open to any direction the council wants to go, and just want to have a free and open discussion about it.
Okay.
Mayor Pro Tem?
So I'll just say, more palatable, I guess is a fine term. For me personally, I just don't have enough information to tell you, oh yeah,
Sure.
I want to see a lease negotiate. I think we just need a little bit more info on it. I mean, obviously I'm sitting here kind of questioning, well, if this was never going to be palatable, these kind of payments, what was the...
Well, I think he explained it at the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
It made sense.
No,
So why
but-
don't we,
yeah.
I think what we're saying is, go forth, work it out, bring it back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for your
Yep.
time. Appreciate it. Thank you.
I think that sums it up. Okay, are we finished with that one?
Yes, and
Okay.
you're finished with me for the moment, I
Oh,
think. as
what?
well.
What? Get back up here. Okay, then we're at 6.7, potential rezoning of DDA Evergreen properties on Evergreen Avenue. That's not you. Oh, you are a
me.
different person. God, you guys
This is Mr. Zoning. Don't you
Yes, Mr. Haywood. Okay,
I can find my cursor here. Okay. So what I want to talk to you a little bit about tonight is zoning the Evergreen properties, right? So this is the properties 314 to 344 on Evergreen, currently possession of the DDA, adjacent to the People's Church to the west, and Valley Court there to the north. Adjacent to the east is the Dublin Square property generally. So what I want to cover a little bit tonight is current zoning of the property, how the master plan looks forward for the property, potential zoning districts for the location, and comparisons of those districts, and then talk about some options. So first, the property is currently zoned RM32 after a long string of historical rezonings for potential projects, whether that's parking, community facilities, B3, conditional B3, and so on. So it's been back and forth, considering a lot of different development types. But generally, the RM32 district allows residential, single-family, two-family, multiple-family by right. In fact, you could just pull a building permit for those uses. Where uses require a site plan would be multifamily over 5 units or more. And then uses that require a special use permit would be any kind of civic use, nonprofit headquarters and recreational uses, offices, and Class B multifamily. The height for the district is limited to 3 stories or 40 feet, or up to 6 stories with a special use permit on acres, or on property 3 acres or more. The total site size here with all the properties combined is just a little over an acre.
They'd be limited to 3 under RM32.
Correct.
Okay.
Master plan, the future land use category for these properties is the M3 category. That's mixed use. It's really intended to increase the housing opportunities, whether through maintenance or redevelopment. The uses are very similar to what we would see in B2. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but manufacturing, laboratory, health club, hotel, retail, restaurant services, office, residential, and parking. Building heights here are minimum 2 stories with a maximum of 4 stories and up to 6 stories with a bonus. So the potential districts here, as we talked about, the B2 is the natural fit compared in consideration with a master plan. But we've seen, of course, a historical interest in B3 to try to achieve some additional density, or at least there have been proposals and some approvals related to that. So we'll focus a little bit about on B3. B3 is a very wide range of commercial uses. I think we're fairly familiar with what B3 permits in our downtown area, everything from commercial, retail, office, civic, public assembly, personal service, and residential. Development standards do apply. They get a little quirky in B3. There's a floor area ratio requirement that at least requires a second floor or additional floors. With regard to height, B3 is a little bit different than most of our districts. It has a couple of absolute heights. So if you have no residential component, you have to start off with 4 floors. If you do have a residential component, it has to be 6 stories. Any deviation from that, below or above, up to 8 stories, requires a special use permit. And then ultimately you can go to 140 feet with proving that there's significant public benefits, which are defined further in our code. Both districts have unique parking requirements. B2 generally requires on-site parking. So if we were pursuing B2, there would be some on-site parking would be required, so that might eat into the property a little bit. but there are reductions for certain qualifying criteria up to 50%, and then a waiver for unique circumstances. Whereas B3 requires that the parking be provided in the municipal system. So in fact, they prohibit on-site parking. There are, again, waivers that can be granted that would allow for on-site parking, usually related to specific use. For example, residential, the Abbott provides on-site parking for their residents, and the other exception would be to provide increased opportunities for barrier-free parking. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about pros and cons. B2, pros for the B2 would be that it's in keeping with the master plan. If we were going to hold tight to our master plan recommendations, that would be the district, or the zoning district, and then provides a wide range of land use options, both commercial and residential. The cons here is that given its limited density, it might limit the property value and potential for TIF to deal with the DDA debt. Additionally, there might be some uses allowed in the B2 district that might not be quite compatible with the surrounding area, such as wholesale, auto service and sales, drive-in businesses, and medical marijuana businesses, specifically secure transport and safety compliance. Moving on to B3, some of the pros here allows for significant density and flexibility in use, which would increase the property value and potential for TIF to manage the DDA debt. It's generally pedestrian-oriented. The cons here would allow for height above the master plan, up to 140 feet. There are, of course, the potential for resident concerns regarding the height, and it's not in keeping with the master plan requirement to be B2. So again, this pros and cons list on either side here is really more for a conversation starter. Anybody could come up with, imagine their own list, either in addition to or subtracting some of these. So this is just a kind of a kind of prime the pump on the discussion. And then alternatives to direct zoning, conditional rezoning. There's always an opportunity here to kind of mix and match a little bit between the two districts. If you wanted to benefit some of the density involved in the B3 district, but not the overall height, somewhere in between, or find a happy medium, that would be an option. You can create your own list of land uses, provided that at least the list that you're saying are permitted were in the district to begin with, but leave off some others that might be undesirable. So you have to at least start with the district you're choosing and then work with those uses and subtract some. But so there's a lot of flexibility in conditional rezoning. A couple other things to consider when we're talking about the site are, of course, our effort to adopt form-based code here. We're looking at a summer as a potential rollout for that and discussions to start implementation. And then also the utility improvements in the area that would most likely eliminate Evergreen Avenue and create a pedestrian link there. So that might change, of course, what types of uses we want to see there in terms of their foot traffic and usage. So with that, I would take questions.
Councilor Meadows.
Just want to go back to conditional rezoning. And I guess I was under the impression that our conditional rezoning was sort of limited to a project. In other words, we've conditionally rezoned this if we end up approving a site plan for a particular project, and if that doesn't go, the conditional rezoning is gone. So I think I've been misinterpreting that. I didn't realize we could do conditions on the condition. That allows us to sort of look at a B3 and say, hey, no, but no more than 8 stories, or things like that. I guess I'd prefer to look at this so that we can sort of customize the zoning for that particular area. So that's just my view on it.
Yeah, can you go back to the B2, B3 so we can look at that? Mayor Pro Tem?
The pros and cons or the actual
The
district?
actual,
description.
yeah, right there. Yeah, right there.
One more back.
No, I think
No,
that's
that is it.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I'd actually agree with that. I had voiced concerns previously regarding conditional rezoning tied to a project. In the past, I think this council definitely emulated the idea that we just want to set our zoning and say whatever comes in is whatever comes in, right? As long as it's within the zoning parameters. But I have kind of concerns with both B2 and B3. I feel like there's a really big difference between the two of them, and we're balancing kind of a lot of things. And I'll let everybody else speak, but I do have like certain kind of things down the list.
I think I brought this up a couple meetings ago about how I feel like there's just too much difference between these
Yeah.
zones to be abutted zones, that it's not really transitional, it's really dramatically different. And then I think also we have to, the elephant in the room is this very large debt that's hanging over those specific Evergreen properties, and which is, a condition that I hope will never be attached to any other property that we have to deal with, but is unfortunately attached to these. And so, if we have something that where, could be limited to 6 stories and is an acre, and then we're asking to get as much out of it as we can to cover as much of that debt as we can, we've really put a condition on that is going to limit the amount that we can get for that. So I think something that is larger and a little bit more broad than a B2, but not as open-ended as a B3, which kind of,
Yeah.
Which we can do.
which we can do.
And that's called conditional, even though there's no project.
Correct, yeah, you can,
So it's not the same as what we were thinking.
No, I know that
Okay.
that's
yeah, it's usually,
Yeah.
usually we see projects come in, somebody's proposing something, and then
Right.
that's the opportunity to say, well, if it isn't that development, then
Right.
no go. But when you are looking for development, but aren't committed to a district, then you do have the ability to abbreviate your district.
Interesting.
Great.
great.
So I had 2 things. First, I hope we remember, we don't have to pay off all that debt.
No, but I think
We need to do our best.
Yes.
Yep, I agree. But to think, I'm telling you, we've tried to do this 4 times now, and with a 12-story building and 100% TIF, there's not enough money. And I don't want a 12-story building there.
Yep.
So I think what we're trying to say is, can you come back to us with I wish we didn't have to call it conditional, or a special zone that allows does the walkability and everything in B3, and the setbacks, but just doesn't allow it to go to 140 feet.
I got another question on this.
Of course, the B3 gives council the ability to stop at
Yeah,
112.
we're not gonna
But-
be here forever.
Okay, I understand. You want for future.
I hope we have done it before we're not here.
Yeah, have you been, how long, you know how long that building was
No,
there?
I've been all through four iterations.
Yeah.
So. Does it also allow us to sort of increase, so if we put B2 on there, sort of as a fallback, but we had a conditional rezoning that allowed a greater height, can we allow a greater height in a conditional rezoning? Or can we only start to restrict down, to move down from permitted heights?
My understanding is that you can only restrict what's in the district. You go down from what's in the district, not above what's in the
Okay,
district.
well,
And
that's a
just-
good answer.
Just to remind you, the Rockwood development, Provision Living on Abbott Road, that was a conditional rezone before a project.
Oh.
Remember, we
Okay.
conditioned the use to
That's right.
age restricted,
Right.
but not to a specific project.
Right.
And then
That works.
on the February 24th, we get the RFQ responses, right? And we wouldn't want to do any of this absent sort of knowing what is hanging out there, do we?
We should have done this
Yeah.
before we did the RFQ.
Well, but we didn't, so that's
True
why I'm
fact.
asking.
So I have strong feelings about that. I think, well, so first of all, I do want to echo, I am not expecting to get our full debt back from this, and I actually am like resigned to not doing that because I think it's more important, it's more important that, that we put the right thing in that area. If we are insisting on getting the full amount that we owe on those properties, it is going to be larger than we want there. And I think that, you know, it's worth it to take on a little bit of that liability in order to have the right development there. I also think it's worth it for us to really kind of define what we would like to see there before we go through these qualification or these RFQ responses, because if we rezone it afterwards based on one of those, then that is the same thing that's been happening forever, where we are really flexing to accommodate a specific project instead of really defining what we want in areas of our town. I'm also going to point out that by the time anything is built on those properties, we will have possibly, if the MSU building goes through as planned, we could have an 8-story tall office building right behind them, which is considerably up a hill, and it might make a little bit more height in that area appropriate. Right. So just as we're going through, consider that what the future surrounding of those areas would look like.
Mayor Pro Tem?
I agree with Councilmember Gregg. I want us to set what we want to see there. And I think that's how we should be doing things. I just wanted to go through just like a couple of things. I echo the statements of 112 feet. The one thing that I did want to talk about, and I'm glad you made a note on parking, because, you know, supplied by the municipal system is generally our practice right now for B3. And there is a conversation going on with the parking task force as well as the DDA and even some of the subcommittees where we're talking about the west end of downtown. And obviously our parking system does have capacity to go forward with that, and we're, you know, restructuring permits and we're talking about more people living downtown. But I'd like to see maybe even that opportunity opened, just because if we are going to be talking about parking on the west end and we're going to see maybe even projects proposed, and of course this is the essence of talking about projects that aren't proposed yet, right? Mm-hmm. So projects that might be contingent on, you know, an office building that needs parking for the people that work there, or even a residential building that wants to add parking for those who live there. I want to be open to that, just because I think that, you know, we do have capacity in our system, but we really haven't seen what the housing downtown is going to do to our parking system right now. And so I just want to have that as an open conversation. So
some kind of conditional rezoning that has a lower height and more parking opportunity.
I'm not sure, it depends on what you mean by more parking opportunities. I think we had several, like a couple of months ago, we commented on the fact that we're going to need parking on the west end of town. So what this says is that it's going to be municipally owned parking. It doesn't say there won't be any parking with regard to this project. It would say that there would have to be a provision in there. We would own some parking in there. And I think we still need to leave that on the table, but it depends on the proposal there, because we also had a proposal more recently that indicated that they were going to have private parking, but they would be restricted by our rates, and they would not be in because one of the issues is the competition to the municipally owned parking. So I'm not so sure we need to have a specific parking element in there until we see whatever proposals that we're going to see.
Yeah, so I'm going to argue with myself now. It's possible. It's a
discussion meeting. You can
and we should have done this beforehand, but even then, it's possible that we will get a project that just blows our minds. Mm-hmm. And then we will just conditionally rezone no matter what we knew now. I hope that we're flexible enough to not say, okay, we just zoned this and now it has to be that. I think that's why we've conditionally rezoned it so many times.
Better be pretty freaking good.
Well, my only comment is that, you know, there's a process that has to go through conditional rezoning. It just doesn't come to us.
Right.
You know, it has to be reviewed and proposed and reviewed by DDA in this particular instance and others. So the other part of this is that it's not going to happen by the 24th.
That's true.
So we are going to have these proposals in hand as we look at how we're going to rezone this property, and I think that's, that's appropriate, and might have the result you have, and we might look at them and say, these guys got to go back to the drawing board because this isn't looking like anything we're going to agree to.
But either way, I think we need something between these two, these
Right.
two.
I agree with that completely.
Yeah, because otherwise it is just too big of a change.
And I
Right.
think there's one more thing, which is yes, we have a master plan that makes reference to a zoning code that is not in existence today. And there is nothing about that says that that's the zoning code we're going to put on these properties.
Right.
So we can create maybe the M3 that we create is somewhere between this. So it's.
So what now would be, you would work on this and bring it back?
Yeah, so what we can do is take your comments and kind of draft up a conditional rezoning, for lack of a better word at this point.
Come up with a better word.
And, oh boy, you're asking a zoning official to come up with a good
Yes, I am.
title.
It doesn't have to be
but I
poetry.
like B3 light. I like.
Yeah, B2 plus.
So yeah, we can do something along those lines.
All right. Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on, 6.8, discussion of non-motorized plan, update, and council focus areas.
Good evening.
Great
I'm the
meeting.
closing
Oh,
act here. Sorry.
You could have asked to go first. I would have said no.
So the purpose here is to get feedback and direction regarding the update of the non-motorized plan. And this is kind of open-ended question because this is a broad topic and it's ever evolving. So our intent is to release the plan RFP in March at some point, but some background how we got the plan. This original plan that was published in 2011 started in 2009, so it took a while to get out the door. And there's going to be where the council spin. We'd like to have the feedback. What are your itches? What are the focus areas? Connectivity, sidewalk gaps. What would you like to see? And again, I'm putting you on the spot here. You don't have to answer today because this might take some time to ruminate to figure out what you want to say towards that. And this is some of the content from the prior plan where we talked about bike lanes and where we're going. And the good news is we've hit a lot of those major streets, and we have plans in the future to hit areas as well. But when we look at what's changed since 2011, well, development downtown, the population shifting. So it's going to create more demand in the urban core for in and around movement. Then we look at changes in transportation. Once upon a time, skateboards were the scourge. Now we have electric scooters, hoverboards, and all kinds of other devices, electric bikes. And how do we incorporate those into a plan? Another good news story here is the funding sources as well. So Safe Routes to School in 2011 was an idea. Well, now it's actuality because thanks to the hard work of the parents, the stakeholders that are moving the ball forward. The trails millage is also good news because that's filling in the gaps and that's allowing the infrastructure and key non-motorized and recreational infrastructure. But that's allowing investment at a higher rate. So instead of having ideas on paper, we're turning ideas into projects. And then we look at non-motorized lessons learned. So the biggest challenge is you build a bike lane and it's not being used. We still have people on the sidewalk. We have people going the wrong way in the bike lane. And what are we designing for? And what should the ideal investment be? So when we look at some ideas here, what are we designing for? Who's the target audience? Is it the casual user and this is a description of someone the casual is someone that's rides their bike occasionally. Then there's someone that's fearless that's going to ride with any car anytime. And who is the target audience? And part of this we had in the fall, we worked with urban transportation class 478, and they did a review of our non-motorized plan and they presented to the Transportation Commission ideas. And it was nice from a student framework or vantage point. So with those materials are included in here for some light reading, but it is a good viewpoint. And in a nutshell, it's about education, outreach, what are other cities doing? And the biggest thing from the student population is there's a lack of understanding of what the city is, who does what. And the best idea that came out of that, safe routes to campus, and when people come to town, this, hey, these are your avenues to not drive. If you're going to use non-motorized assets or infrastructure, this is how you do so safely. So when we look at why do the plan or the goals of the plan, so we want the plan to reflect the built environment. Where is the population going to shift? What has changed as far as design? Things like bike boxes and things. The toughest one is a bike lane between 2 lanes of traffic, because very rarely is someone going to use that bike lane. The fearless will, but the casual user will not. They'll be pushed to the sidewalk. How can we increase use of non-motorized? And it could be education. It's a whole government approach, frankly. And the police are a huge component of this, because they're talking to the little kids. They're out at the public events on their bikes. They're one of the key proponents and stakeholders for moving the awareness and correct way to use it forward. Regional collaborations. We work with Lansing frequently. We talk to Meridian Township. But where are those game-changing? Where are those 3x projects? One gap we have is the Saginaw corridor. And that's going to take big investment and big money to do that. And we look at is it worthwhile to look at the emergent transportation trends? Are e-scooters going to be here? What is the next thing? But also the thought about automated robots and things moving food deliveries. Those are new things. Do we incorporate them into the plan? And increase diverse public involvement. So every time we have a discussion about non-motorized, we hear about people that are very adamant about it, who are very informed. But how do we get the casual user to go, hey, I don't walk because this sidewalk's really narrow. I would really love the bike, but there's no place to lock my bike up, or I really don't like these crossings. I just don't understand it. And last, the big one to link this, to make it a plan into action, linking it to strategic priorities, is focus and prioritize efforts, and then we can look at how to invest limited resources. And one framework of terminology is active transportation plan, because that's kind of, non-motorized is kind of more government, but active, we're going to park the car, we're going to walk, we're going to ride, we're going to maybe scoot or skate, those metrics there. So from here, looking for feedback or ideas. If there's big ideas, and again, this is a dynamic process, because this will be going through with the Transportation Commission. But also in the past, there were other boards and commissions that helped frame this and helped inform it. There was almost a task force. You had components of the Parks Commission, you had planning and other stakeholders that helped to really inform this, because this is beyond the Transportation Commission.
So, do we have any data or information back from the protected bike lane on Bogue?
So MSU is currently reviewing that. They've done some studies. They're looking at what the next step is. They're looking at ideas to what if you remove that from the road and put it in the right of way. These are ideas being discussed. The reason being is to remove conflict points. And that's the other one too. People might ride in the street if it's protected. Mm-hmm. The biggest concern there were the turning movement conflicts, where you have traffic coming from both ways.
Right. So I agree that we've built some nice bike lanes that nobody uses, except for me, because I don't think anybody's going to hit me, but I don't know why I think that.
Because you're a level 4 rider.
They may be, but but I do think it still has a positive effect, because it slows drivers down.
Definitely.
And it does give you an option if you want to ride on the road. Like if there are too many people on the sidewalk, people do get on the road and they get back onto the sidewalk. But I don't know if it's a big idea, if it's a good idea. I don't know what they do in countries that ride a lot of bikes, but I think that most of the bike lanes are protected, or they're paths. Mm-hmm. They're not in the road. Mm-hmm. So
there's some sort of burn.
Rather than putting more bike lanes on a road that nobody's going to use, unless we're using it for traffic calming, I think we should. I mean, that's just me talking. I'm not an expert, but I would love to see more protected bike lanes, more places to ride to get to where you want to go, where you don't have to compete with a vehicle.
I second that.
Mayor Pro Tem.
So, yeah, I mean, I think you highlighted this here, and I definitely think, one of our bigger issues is definitely connectivity. Not only with sidewalks, but definitely also with bike lanes. The Harrison road diet that was proposed before, ironically enough, I actually got my first comment very much in favor and trying to lobby me for that today, which was fun. So I mean, we're talking about getting to campus, getting to downtown, getting back into the neighborhoods. Is there like a possibility of maybe trying something protected over there even?
On Harrison,
Yeah.
the small section that we have teed up for,
Yeah.
so that one's currently going through the MDOT letting process. So
Okay.
we're at the point where that has launched. We could pull it back. The tough one, that'd be a really tough one to do protected on that one, because of when it's narrow, if anything, it functions like a 3-lane when it,
Right.
and it will improve alignment and reduce accidents. And that goes back to a 4-to-3 conversion. One, allows you to get in your driveway if you live off that street. 2, it removes that where you're tailgating someone in the left lane, and that's where the rear end accidents happen, because people stop and you don't expect them to stop. And it allows for moderate bike people with moderate confidence to ride their bicycles in the
Right,
road.
so that's more of a calming with a bike lane spin-off.
Yeah.
It also dead ends into a bottleneck, so it could
Yeah.
only ever be like
A
4
short
blocks
one.
long,
Yeah.
so I don't think it's the best place for that.
No, the only reason why I bring up that specific area though is just because like that is, you get right into MSU where there's a lot of sidewalks, there's a lot of areas to do it, and that tends to be a choke point, right? I mean, it's just, when we're talking about like neighborhoods access through like Bailey, yes, there is neighborhood access through that. Maybe they're crossing one street, Grand River, but Harrison tends to, and the sidewalks there are also
Correct.
thinner and not in the best condition. And so when I talk to cyclists that say, I live in the neighborhoods, I want to get there, and they are on the west end of East Lansing, they say, Harrison's where I have the problem.
Yeah, and
Right.
that's true. You don't have to go, the bottleneck is not that big of an issue, because that is the place where there are 20 kids on this side of the sidewalk and 20 kids on this
Right.
side of the sidewalk, and so you have to ride in the road there, and it's not safe.
And part of this could be connectivity, because the big challenge is how do we get to
Yeah,
campus? And
yeah,
we're looking at,
Right.
Yeah.
and we're looking at how to put bike lanes on Collingwood. We're looking with Park District, there's a bike lane south along Abbott. The challenge though, as designed, it's a bike lane that I don't think would be used unless there's a bike box or other changes.
Right.
And some of these are going to be bigger picture aspirational, and works with MDOT as well. There's some argument that Grand River has capacity for a bidirectional bike lane.
Not our Grand River.
Depends.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Councilmember Gregg.
So I think the biggest two resident feedback things that I've had the most is the reason that they're not using the bike lanes is because the streets aren't swept to the curb, and there's a lot of gravel and debris in the bike lanes, which is not safe, especially for young users who don't know how to navigate when they hit gravel or a pothole. And then the other thing is pedestrian crossings on our major intersections, pedestrian crossings north-south on Saginaw and north-south on Grand River. And I don't know how we can put those in. I live by an overpass, and my kids bike to school because I feel safe that they can go cross Saginaw on the overpass. If I did not live by an overpass, there's no way I would let my kids bike across Saginaw. So, and they're ugly and people hate them, but they are effective. So I don't know. They're also not handicap accessible, which is a problem. And I don't know what the better alternative is for major road crossings that are safe for, vulnerable users. But those are the two things that I'd like to see. And then also just a recognition that traffic does not just mean cars. That, when we talk about taking cars out of downtown, we're also adding unknowingly Vespa scooters, electric rideshare scooters, skateboards, bicycles, all manner of vehicular traffic that is not a car, and that they are behaving like vehicles, not like pedestrians.
On the sidewalk.
All on the sidewalk, yeah. And which I'm not saying separate lanes for everybody, but, just a recognition that our traffic is not 100% cars. So.
Here, Mayor, Councilmember Meadows.
Just want to echo that, and I'd like to know, in terms of protected bike lanes, whether in other communities they allow electric scooters and other means of transportation to utilize those as well, not necessarily Vespa scooters, but certainly electric type of movements. I noticed that in Ann Arbor, the protected bike lanes have been installed. And so the question for me is whether we want protected bike lanes put in as our number one choice, and that in areas like the Harrison between Grand River and Michigan Avenue, where we don't think that really can function, that be sort of like Plan B, as opposed to Plan A, as it has been for a long time. I know I think we're about to resurface Bircham in one of the plants we've got. That would be an opportunity for us to put a protected bike lane for a lengthy period, a lengthy distance. And when I know we're working on Coolidge Road. Coolidge Road was originally built for bike lanes. We just never put the bike lanes in. So it's wide enough to accommodate. And the question for me would be, could we actually put in protected bike lanes and still have 4 lanes along Coolidge Road? So I think all of those issues are things that need to be examined in terms of answering your questions. I think we just need a lot more information on what the projects are that are coming up, what kind of opportunities are available with regard to each one of those, and whether we want to establish a policy anyway of saying, okay, we're all in for protected bike lanes and we're all in for letting electric scooters to ride in them, because that eliminates some of the issues we have on sidewalks as well.
And if we're all in, does that also mean they can't ride on the sidewalks anymore?
Right, that would be my expectation.
And I don't know enough yet to say that protected bike lanes that are also on the road are really protected enough. I mean, my number one would be a trail off the road, off the sidewalk. And I know you have to go into people's property for that, and that's the problem. Then my B would be a protected bike lane on the sidewalk, if it would fit, and then C would be a protected bike lane on the road, and then D would be a bike lane on the road. That's just me. I think that the reason people aren't using bike lanes is because they aren't safe, or they perceive them not to be safe, and I think they're right in that perception. Ironically, I think Bircham is actually one of the more safe areas because people go slowly there. Because they police it.
Bike lanes lower the speed limit.
Yeah.
So and they also reduce the number of rear-end crashes and everything else that we're trying to. They're good traffic regulators.
Mayor Pro Tem?
I'd just like to comment, and this isn't necessarily just specific to the Bogue experiment, but I mean, I do like the idea, and I appreciate you guys trying to work with MSU on this, because I think that really what we're looking for is a mobile East Lansing entirely, right? Not just throughout our neighborhoods, not just throughout, what's above Grand River. How do we connect to the university? And I think they can be a good partner with that. If Bogue Street isn't going to work out in the future, and if there were too many issues with, the traffic and impeding turns, that's fine. I want to be able to say, if you live in X neighborhood and you work on campus, or you want to get to the Wharton Center for a show, this is your route, right? So that's my, it's my succinct.
All right.
All right, well, very good.
All right, thank you
very much.
And with that, we are adjourned for your daughter's birthday party. Sorry.